Hello and welcome to the deepest dive on The Last of Us Part 2, the best, most thorough discussion about the entire game on the internet. I'm Ben Hansen, joined by Cyril Vasquez.
Hi.
The developer of Hyperdot, Charles McGregor.
Hello.
Thank you for not screaming quite as much. And Jeff Marchiafava.
How are you doing?
Oh, so saucy. Welcome, everybody. This is it. This is the grand finale for our discussion about The Last of Us Part 2. This is covering... spoilers, by the way, and this is covering specifically everything in the game from Seattle Day 3, but spoilers, Abby's Seattle Day 3 up until the ending, and then the part that you think is the epilogue, and then after that part, and then the part that you think is the epilogue for that, and then
the
after
10
that.
more times that the game kept on going.
That's right. As we covered last week, until we all walked outside and put our hand in front.
Yes, I did exactly
the sun.
that.
Oh, great. We should point out for folks that if you don't want to watch this on YouTube, and at the same time you want to support the Deepest Dive format, the Game Club format moving into the future, you could support us at the $5 tier on Patreon and unlock the podcast version of this, in addition to all of our past Deepest Dives, early access to the MinnMax show, access to our Patreon exclusive podcast MinnFacts that we post every single week, a lot of other fun stuff like that, commentary tracks. So your support would mean a lot. If you enjoyed this ride, we'd always appreciate that support moving into the future. And as always, we should point out that 1, 2, and 3 of us were sent Last of Us codes from Sony. Charles, though, dug into his pockets, dug deep, and just ponied up.
His money provided him his copy.
Yes,
that's
right.
How
that goes.
Not us to his money.
Thank you, money.
Speaking of shouting out to money, we should get to the most important thing here, which is on last week's episode of The Deepest Dive, we were speculating about how the game will end, and we all called it 100% correctly when Abby takes a sock full of quarters and beats Isaac over the head. And we asked for cool phrases that she should say at that time, and YouTube has not disappointed. Here are a list of quotes that Abby could have said if the game would have ended with her beating Isaac with a sock full of quarters. Quarter for your thoughts. Get a load of this close quarters combat. After killing Isaac with a sock of coins, Ellie should definitely say, now that's what I call a money shot. I don't think that one's appropriate. Abby hits Isaac over the head with a sock full of quarters. Then Ellie says, wow, you really socked it to him. Cut to credits. Okay. Let's see. Sidewinder suggested you just got knocked senseless. Jesse James has a nice, simple one, hitting Isaac over the head, and then she just says, keep the change. What about this? Hermes Job on YouTube recommends, I'm going to put my money where your mouth is.
Good.
That one's good, yeah.
And also an alternative there, I'm about to change your face, which is excellent work from everybody, and we could only dream of the game actually ending that way and our dreams coming true there. Also,
I'm surprised no one said, I guess you put a sock in it.
I mean, there's variations of that. Basically, they were out there. Also, thanks to everybody that repeatedly sent me links to the fact that incendiary shotgun shells do exist, and they're called Dragon's Breath, and there is a thriving YouTube community that's very into the Dragon's Breath shotgun shells, so thank you for letting me know.
Good to know.
Also, last bit of recap from last episode, it killed me that right when you stopped recording, I was like, oh my god, somebody was asking about Abby's, like, the slight nod to her being into books and whether or not that came back, and I remembered later on when she's in that base, she does have a line where she's talking to somebody, and she's like, hey, are you done with Count of Monte Cristo yet? I wanted to read that one. So there's a subtle reference too. Okay, now it's time to guess the most common comment. People have gone to patreon.com/MinnMax2N, so they support us at any tier. They can submit a comment for us to read for The Deepest Dive, also for the MinnMax Show podcast, also for MinnTracks, our music podcast, everything under the sun. So people submitted all these comments. That's where we're reading all these from. But what do you think was the most common comment for this section of The Deepest Dive?
I loved herding sheep or whatever animals they had.
Okay. Herding sheep. Any other guesses?
This is a long game.
Oh, interesting. Close to that, I think the sorry for the long post was maybe ultimately the most common comment, but specifically, Jeff, you got any guesses?
Her playing the guitar at the end there.
Oh, interesting. Her playing the guitar at the end there. No, it was debates or questions about whose side are you on? Whose allegiance are you with? Okay. Are you more of an Abby person or an Ellie person, or just that shifting dynamic, which is kind of a nebulous one, but it was hundreds of comments left on the Patreon just about that. So thank you to everybody that submitted comments.
That's
there.
Like the most mainstream one of these guesses has ever been.
I know.
Usually it's like, oh, this blade of grass was...
Well, that's the deepest dive, baby. That's the level of specificity we want to get into with this stuff.
You still didn't guess it.
That's right. Well, hey, before we get into specifics even, we finished the game at this point. We no longer have to be scared of spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2, everything that.
Oh, that's so nice.
It's such a relief, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is the classic recurring thing of it's the Home Alone scene of walking up going, I'm not afraid anymore. Like, you can go on the internet, you can read everything. But just to be clear, this is a pretty raw discussion. I haven't read any interviews with Naughty Dog about the end of the game, listened to any... I haven't listened to like other spoiler casts. Are you all in the same boat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there might be some things that are completely out of line with what Naughty Dog has said. Maybe we can have a follow-up discussion where we kind of touch on some of that stuff if there's some good tidbits out there. But, you know, I'm personally too easily influenced, I think, if I were to listen to a lot of other spoiler casts, and I'd be like, oh, here are my thoughts, but it's not as raw and as accurate. And we're trying to be strict here with what we're doing with the deepest dive. But where's everybody at? In a broad sense, Charles, how'd the ending chunk of this game sit with you?
I think that we already know that I've gone on record saying that Last of Us is my favorite game.
You don't need to be so reluctant about it.
I know.
This is the place to celebrate Last of Us, man.
And I'm really diplomatic when it comes to that. I'm like, oh, I understand there's so many different points, and I know that like if you ask me this tomorrow, I'll probably change my my statement.
Just go with it, Charles. Just go with it.
Yes, I love The Last of Us.
Thank you.
But so I feel like I'm painting The Last of Us Part 2 in the fact that like, oh, I love The Last of Us. If it's not The Last of Us, or there are things that that I wanted out of The Last of Us, then I'd be like, well, I'm all mad about it, or I'm not necessarily mad about it, but disappointed about it. And partway through playing The Last of Us Part 2, I realized that this is not my story. This is Ellie's story. So this is me, or like whatever I wanted Ellie to do. I was like, oh, I don't want to do this, but this is, I can again logically figure out. If I was Ellie and this is my mindset, I can figure out these are the logical steps that Ellie is thinking in her head to do these things.
Whereas in the first game, I mean, I don't know how you felt about the ending of the first game, but you felt like, okay, my ambition is pretty closely aligned with where Joel's at, and in this one is that disconnect.
Yeah, where it was like I did, or in the first game, so this is actually something that I realized after playing The Last of Us Part 2, was that in the first game, I didn't feel like I was doing things like, or I had any control over like doing something that I didn't want to do.
Right.
Where like if I was Joel, throughout the entire time, I wasn't like, oh, Joel, why'd you do that? There was only like 2 parts where I'd be like, oh, Joel, why'd you do that? But that was in a cutscene. So
right.
I didn't actually do it.
Yeah.
So, but where in this, I'm actually performing some of the things that I'm like, I don't want to do these things.
And specifically in this last chunk that split really, really wide.
Yeah. Yeah. Where it was like, oh, I really don't want to do these things. And if I hadn't have said, this is not my story, this is Ellie's story, earlier, I think it was around like, I want to say it was early in the Deepest Dive run. Yeah. I'd say like episode 2, where I was like, okay, this is not my story. If I hadn't have done that, then I don't think that I would have liked the rest of the game as much, because I would have been in that mindset where I'm like, oh, this doesn't make any sense to me. And because I did that, I feel like I understand and I realize what they're trying to do better. To a point where I appreciate it. I don't think that I would say that, yes, I like The Last of Us Part 2 more than I like the first one.
Yeah.
But there are parts of The Last of Us Part 2 that do rise above some of the parts in the first one, where I'm like, oh wow, that was just like a phenomenal way of like execution on this thing, or just like literally the technical achievement of what they have been able to accomplish.
Not to diagnose you, but it seems like you're intellectualizing it a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to like rationalize with yourself or reason with yourself about not enjoying it as much as you expected. And are you overthinking it? Like, God, do I enjoy this more? Should I appreciate this more? And I'm just not on a guttural level here.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why, like, when I first started it, I was not enjoying it as much, especially because I think the first part is a lot slower than I thought it would be. So I was, like, from that time on, I was like, oh, why am I not enjoying this as much as I would think that I was?
Right, and it's just they got to give it away. Jeff, where are you sitting at with this thing?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it throughout. I think I was left with a few questions at the end, particularly with kind of what Ellie's takeaway was with everything. Where, like, obviously there are a lot of themes going through it that are perfectly clear in all those things, and I appreciated everything it was doing. It was just kind of that last scene where I was left like, okay, yeah, so, like, obviously there are lessons here. Did Ellie actually learn these lessons? What is she thinking about them? And that was kind of a weird note to go out on. And it mirrors the start of the game for me, where, you know, like in the first episode I was talking about, I think The Last of Us has one of the best beginnings and one of the best endings of any video game. And both the beginning and the ending of this were, you know, the beginning was a little slower than I expected. Yeah. And the ending I was left a little more confused by, but taken as a whole, I really liked everything that it was doing. Yeah.
Cyril, where are you at?
The last few hours are a little bit of a blur because I did them in like 1 or 2 sittings, but I'm a little conflicted about like some of the themes like Jeff mentioned, because like I think that finale is maybe a little ambiguous, which isn't, you know, necessarily a bad thing, but I think I came away from it kind of thinking like, okay, like Naughty Dog is best at kind of creating these interesting characters, but I think like usually the kind of framework that they're kind of working those characters within doesn't always mesh with me. So I think I mentioned before about how like on a fundamental level, I'm not like a huge zombie fiction or like post-apocalyptic fan. Yeah. Just because a lot of the themes that kind of setting brings with it. And I think that this is like an interesting story about like people kind of dealing with it, with, you know, the apocalypse, but there are a lot of like givens that the game kind of takes for granted that I don't necessarily that like they don't really question, you know, things like, you know, what I mentioned before about like how everyone is a little bit too militarized, you know, after the end of the world. But there are like interesting, like I said, there are a lot of like good character notes here that I think I have left me kind of like, I don't know exactly how I feel about the ending specifically. I'm not sure where I land on it. But you know, even having finished it pretty like a while ago, it's still kind of, I'm still trying to decide like whether or not it like is good because it is ambiguous, or if it just feels like it kind of botches like what it was trying. Like if you had a clear message that it kind of botched, or if it had an unclear message that it succeeded at delivering. Yes,
I'm roughly in the same wheelhouse as you. Just to get out of the gate, I loved this game. There's zero doubt in my mind that I love this game a lot more than the first one. As we mentioned before, my experience with the first one was complicated because I edited a spoiler discussion before I played it. So like, you know, everything's a little bit soiled from my point of view on that first game. But I just adored this game. And right when I was finishing it, it was that weird feeling of like, okay, first half of the game, preparing this specific dish, the Ellie dish. We got some crab. We got some lettuce. I don't know. What's a dish? You prepare this meal. Then it's, okay.
Crab and lettuce, yeah.
Okay. Reset. Yeah. Hey, second half of the game. Let's make this Abby dish equally interesting. Adds a whole new perspective. Makes you tear down and kind of deconstruct what you thought in the first one. Maybe you don't like crab. Maybe you don't like lettuce. And then that final chunk, it's like they just took all the ingredients, threw it in the stir fry, and just kind of shuffled it together, and ta-da! And I'm still trying to figure out, like a lot of you, like what is the point of that third chunk? What is it adding to this mix? Because at the end of like Abby's story and those fights that obviously we'll get into with Ellie there, I mean, that is some of my favorite gaming moments of all time. Like that is just incredible work from my point of view. Like the amount of mental gymnastics I was going through during that sequence was just unbelievable. And then to follow it up with an epilogue, I was like, okay, great. I don't mind an epilogue. And then maybe a little bit like some other games that won't be named for Jeffem's sake, this epilogue just goes on for so long. It's like, this isn't an epilogue. This is a chunk of the game. Now, what is this chunk delivering to me that I didn't have before? And that's the part that I still need to work through with the community here. And believe it or not, people have a lot of thoughts on all of these topics. So I think we'll get to some insight here overall. Okay, Seattle Day 3. It starts with Abby waking up. There's a lot of waking up in this game. There's a lot of specifically Abby waking up. Waking up and sleeping and nightmares is like this recurring thing throughout The Last of Us Part 2 that I don't know how many folks are talking about, but it's an interesting recurring theme. Then there is the debate between Mel and Abby. IanTClark writes in and says, hey, when Mel tells Abby she's a piece of S, you can see in the facial animations that Abby feels the same way, or at least thinks the insult was deserved. She looks absolutely broken by these words. Shortly after, when Yara tells Abby that Mel was wrong and she's a good person, I could feel Abby wanting to believe her. That scene was really tough.
Yeah, it was unexpected for me, but I liked it because a lot of their interactions up until that point, you knew that there was kind of this bad blood between the two of them. Yeah. And it seemed very much like they were trying to like, okay, they're mending fences and they're kind of getting over it. And Abby, for her part, was kind of going along with that. But I like that Mel ultimately just called her out at the end and been like, yeah, no, what I've seen you do, like, I'm not getting over that. I don't trust you.
So Adam Wilbert writes in and says, the scenes where Abby and Lev bond with the dog were gut-wrenching. I can forgive Abby for killing Joel after seeing the story from her perspective, but I honestly don't think I can forgive Ellie for killing Bear and Alice. Overall, I love the game. There's one small oversight, though. In the aquarium, there's a photo op cutout where children can put their head to look like some sea creature. Maybe it was a seal or something. I can't remember. Anyway, the cutout is the perfect height for Abby to kneel behind, but the photo mode camera controls won't allow the perspective to rotate around to the front of the artwork. Completely missed opportunity here, Naughty Dog.
Blew it.
And this is the type of just shoddy craftsmanship from Naughty Dog that we've come to expect. I don't understand what they're going for anymore. Let's see. We also have... Oh, I like that. I like the playing with the dog stuff. And I think it was Abby and Yara specifically with the dog. We're like, oh, I'm glad that the squeaky toy returned, that I just noticed sitting in that room a little bit earlier and stuff. I love the scene where Owen comes in and just is a little bit jokey about like, oh, what are you taking from my aquarium? And Yara like can't pick up on him joking overall about this stuff. And then like one of my favorite scenes of the game that nobody wrote in about was just when Owen's like, look, it's messy, but we can make this whole thing work. Like the Mel thing, I understand, but maybe there's something here. And Abby just like puts him in place and she goes, hey, get your priorities straight here. And I love that moment so much. I think that is just like a little line that get your priorities straight that could sum up a lot of what they're going for with The Last of Us Part 2. But hey, everybody, how about you just focus and get your priorities straight and try and focus on what's good in your life here? And I thought that really summed up a lot from her work there. John Griffin wrote in with a tangentially related thing. He says, the aquarium gave me flashbacks to a trip I took to an abandoned water park in Vietnam last year. The real thing was even better than the pictures. It was the most Last of Us thing I've ever seen in real life. It's called the Toi Tien Lake Abandoned Water Park. Check it out. It's THUYTIEN. I Googled this for a while. It is absolutely worth Googling. If you like cool abandoned theme parks, and as a Jurassic Park fan, that's my life. And so, yeah, check that out. Toi Tien Lake Abandoned Water Park in Vietnam. Nick Olson writes in and says, one little detail that tore me apart was towards the beginning of this section. It is such a smart touch to have Yara use the scars. Sorry, Seraphites, says Nick. Use the scars as whistle to try to find Lev in the aquarium. What was once a terrifying audio cue now had a completely different connotation because of the circumstances, and I completely loved it. That is such a smart touch.
You can tell it's just kind of built into their language at that point that they don't even really think about it. You know, it's
right.
Whatever they're saying with that specific melody, you know, to it.
Yeah.
She knew that Lev would. She, you know, probably didn't even think about it. It's just like instinctual at that point. Yeah.
I was a little bit torn on that on the Yara conversation. Overall, where she was like unpacking kind of the history of Lev overall. Here, Colin will get into it here. Colin says, Colin Rothermel, we should note, She says, right at the beginning of the section, while still in the aquarium, Yara mentions to Abby that Lev would have been claimed as a wife by one of the elders of the Seraphites. As if I didn't like them already, this one sick comment was enough to cement my hatred for the cultists and make me want to hunt them down going onto the island. I was much less stealthy in this section and instead wanted to hand out justice to Lev's oppressors. Very specific. That scene overall, it's like, I think maybe I'm a cynic, but a part of me was like, I think they just wanted to give Yara some more screen time or give her kind of like a weightier performance moment where she kind of got to get emotional talking about her backstory there overall. But I really loved in the last section how kind of understated and quick the Lev backstory was. But just, they're calling you Lily? I don't want to talk about it. Move on. It's like, well, y'all got it by and large. Maybe some people didn't. There were some comments last time they didn't quite pick up on it. Did you all have thoughts on kind of Yara revisiting that backstory and shedding more light into exactly what happened there?
I think it's a lot of what they do in some of those notes, right? It felt like they were kind of bringing one of those side stories of like, oh yeah, day 45, I did this, and then here's like and then it ends with like, oh well, I hope I don't get eaten or whatever, and then that's the last thing they end up writing. It felt like a little like they were kind of exploring one of those sub stories in the game itself, and obviously it's relevant to the main plot, but it felt like they were giving you little details of kind of Lev's story without like, okay, let's have this the whole like the Lev debrief now in this one scene, so they're kind of interspersing it a little bit.
Yeah. Ben Cooper writes in and says, one thing I don't hear talked about much is the dreams/nightmares Abby has. After killing Joel, I feel she thought they would go away, but we still see that she has them. After leaving the two Seraphites, her nightmares change to them being murdered instead of her dad. It isn't until she actually finds a morally good purpose in life and strives to achieve it that we can see her dreams turn into a happy experience where her dad is there to greet her. It was a subtle way to show how empty and meaningless that horrible act was, and that she was done with the cycle of hate and revenge. Well put, Ben Cooper. Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see just a supercut about all the dream sequences in this section. Like, nobody wrote in as well about Ellie's kind of nightmare section later where the tool falls over in the barn and then like the flash of Joel and then she's like walking down the super tall stairs. I'm just so excited to see Naughty Dog do some slightly more abstract environments overall. I think it's probably really fun and liberating for that team to not be so adhered to a pseudo reality of sorts. But I thought that stuff was really great, and Ben summarized it well, that it's a great way to track where Abby's at internally. So maybe that's why there has to be so much sleeping. It's just so there's a reason for her waking up and having that stuff still be relevant. So we go back to the streets of Seattle, and there's a jump scare with Manny coming back. Did anybody see this coming?
No, I didn't see it coming. I did not it was not much of a jump scare for me. It was more like I was prepared because there was a lot of shooting and stuff. So I was already like, okay, there's going to be something that happens. And then it happened.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I mean, was there a lot of precedent for Manny coming back? Is it just, I don't think they ever do they tease it at all? Like, I'll still be around the area.
No, not tease it, but it's that thing of like, oh, that's right. Of course, his story will be resolved in some way. I just didn't expect him to come back. And then ultimately his fate was one of those things where like, yeah, if I thought about it, I would assume that he'd probably be taken out. But I think the way that they did that, I was absolutely in love with. Just the fact that he was mid-sentence and then you just see his head get blown apart. I thought that was unbelievable.
Yeah. No, again, this
things before, but sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that this is really just like cements the no one has a glamorous death in this game.
Right.
Again, like you could argue Joel where it shows his face right before, but like even then it was just like, all right, it happened.
Yeah.
And then like, but like, yeah, it was just like, yeah, mid-sentence, and then, okay, we have now moved on to Abby like dealing with the fact that Manny just died right in front of her.
Oh, and then she's like, she puts her face on her hand, it's covered in blood, and then depending on where she touches the counter, there's like that red blood hand mark as well. That was incredible. And just that entire section I really enjoyed, despite the fact that I don't know where Tommy got like 500 bullets and he's just offloading all those sniper shots and stuff. But I thought that was like a nice payoff to Tommy teaching Ellie how to snipe earlier in the game in that flashback. And I love that little moment where Manny's talking about the trespasser with Abby. And Abby's like, what trespasser? Like, there's nothing better than this character's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Like, these are not even considerations in my world right now, even though, this trespasser is responsible for so many things in her life and steers her in a big way. But it was nice too, just to have that change of pace for the gameplay, to have like that more militarized, like, we got to push up, and slowly working your way through there. And every shot from Tommy was just so loud and impactful. I thought that section was really interesting just for an overall change. When you think you know what this game can throw at you, it's like, okay, light action set piece, okay, fighting humans, stealth humans, fighting infected, stealth infected, just to have this completely change of pace was interesting.
Yeah, and I wasn't, for some reason, I wasn't really expecting that, like, oh yeah, of course, Tommy's been out in this world, like, terrorizing the wolves the entire time.
Right.
Like, it makes sense that you would cross paths with him at some point, but I guess I wasn't expecting that from a gameplay perspective, and that made it an interesting dynamic where you're pushing up on him and you're trying to get to him, and it's like, well, okay, I'm not going to kill him, but like, what's going to happen when I get there? And he's also being a really big pain in the ass right now.
Yeah.
Cut it out, Tommy. What are you doing? And especially when you're going through, I also liked going through that parking lot where he's like basically luring in the infected on you, which was a real pain in the ass while he's also still sniping you. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
It was amazing.
God damn it, Tommy.
It took me way too long to realize that it was Tommy. How long did it take you all before you realized, like, oh, that sniper obviously is the narrative sniper in this story?
Yeah, I didn't see it coming at all. Like, it was when I think it's when you first kind of see the back of his character, like when you, like, as you get close to him, you see more of him. And there was a point I think where you see his like jacket, and I was like, oh, it's Tommy. Like, cause like before then I was kind of busy doing like the, here's the kind of section where you have to close in on a sniper basically. But like once you see kind of a little bit of the narrative things where he's kind of running away from you, that's when I started. Oh, okay, that's Tommy.
Yeah. Oh, that's a Tommy. So then they get in the boat, head out to the island. I think only ever referred to the island. There's part of me trying to figure out, like, is this Bainbridge Island in Seattle? If you're a Seattleite and you think you know what island this is, please let us know, because I'd love to know what island they based it off of, if any. But
they said the Space Needle. Oh, wait, they were going towards the Space Needle. So that was my only point of reference.
Well, that was a confusing thing, because it's like, well, is there I don't think there's an island that would have the Space Needle that close, but they want to be able to see it from the island. So that kind of made things murky too. But I love that little bit too, where they're like talk about, oh, the big tower. And she's like, you mean the Space Needle? And then Yarrow's like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? It's very fun. It's weird how clued into like the old world Abby is. She made some reference to Santa Barbara being the Bermuda Triangle. I was like, what? Would she? I mean, she was pretty young.
She reads.
I guess you're right. And all the fiction, I guess there's a lot of Bermuda Triangle books still floating around. So you're right.
Isn't the Bermuda Triangle off the coast of Florida? Am I dumb?
No, it is. Yeah. But she reads a lot about that. But just the idea of like Santa Barbara, some mysterious things happen. You go in, you don't come out, yada, yada, yada.
Okay. It's a thematic, not like a literal.
Okay.
That's right. That's right. Anyways, I was so excited to finally get to see what's going on with the Seraphites and like learn about their culture specifically. And I love the way they build it up about like, oh my God, is that your village? That's huge. And it's like, no, that's Haven. That's like, that's the suburbs for our actual colony here. It's such a cool vibe. And then even like the weird stuff of they see that carved tree or like, the martyr figures that carved into it. Like that's the type of stuff I was totally on board for. And then you actually get into the village, and then it just feels like, okay, now we're just in Resident Evil 4 at this point, working your way through this village. Everybody's got torches and pitchforks, all that fun stuff, throwing it at you. Did you think of that too, Serial?
A little bit. Like it reminded me of like the part where it's raining outside when you kind of wake up from the nightmare that I think you have where you were infected and Ashley, you have that nightmare with Ashley or whatever, and then you wake up and it's night and it's raining. Oh,
I see. Okay, in 4, yeah. By the way, the weather in this game is one of those like genius moments. Just like, oh, that's so cool. Where like as you're working your way through the island and the storm's picking up, that's just such an awesome way to like reset your perspective to be like, okay, right now I bet Ellie is taking that boat into the sound based on the intensity of the weather, like being able to track where you're at because of the simultaneous weather storms in both stories. I think was a really smart idea overall. So they go and they find Lev, and his mom is dead. I guess she kept screaming and then started attacking Lev, and then Lev pushed her, or eventually the mom just fell on the table and her head cracked open. Do you buy that? Is that too convenient of a story here?
I think it's a little tropey in terms of like there are a lot of times where somebody doesn't mean to do anything, but somebody's like being, oh, I'm really mad at you, rah, rah, and then the other person's like, oh, back off, and then they back off and fall and hit their head on a corner of a table or something like that.
But is it a trope if we don't see it? Who can say? I did love.
If a trope falls in the woods.
That's right. I love that moment where Yara and Lev kind of reunite. And there's this quick little moment where Abby looks at Lev and she goes, hey, kid. And Lev does not give her the time of day. It's not that she hates Abby. It's just like this other reinforcement of the fact that like, yeah, Abby, you're not that important. You're not that important in anybody's story except for Ellie's. Maybe Owen's, I guess you could say, right? But it's just this weird disconnect where you realize that, yeah, Lev isn't nearly as attached to Abby as Abby is to Lev at this point. Maybe I'm reading too much into that. Charles Bean writes in and says, Jeffrey Wright plays Isaac? This guy's in everything these days. I did not realize that till the end credits. And I was like, oh, okay. That's that connection maybe through Westworld. Obviously, the narrative lead worked on Westworld, and then Shannon Woodward was with Jeffrey Wright a lot in Westworld overall, so I guess that makes sense. Muffin Crumbs says, I love that you don't fight Isaac or the leader of the Scars in some kind of boss fight, and instead he just simply dies for getting shot by Yarrow. They were really just background characters in the story, and I really like that they focused on Abby versus Ellie. I appreciate, says Darren, that the game isn't afraid to kill a character off without giving them a death monologue. Jesse, Isaac, Manny, and Yara are all pretty much killed so quickly that the player never got a moment to really chew on their deaths. It's a really bold way to handle some key characters' deaths. Yeah, that sequence. What'd y'all think of that?
For me, it really cemented like Abby had not necessarily like a change of heart, but like got her priorities straight, where it was like, oh, I care about these two kids, and I don't want don't touch them, please, let them live. And it was like, oh, I'm starting to like understand where your mindset is, like in action, not necessarily just in thought. Yeah, absolutely. Tyler Carver here says, a thing that sticks with me the most from the entire game is during Seattle Day 3, Abby's fighting through an entire war between two factions hell-bent on destroying each other just to find her own redemption. The line, "You're my people," hit me like a ton of bricks, and I seriously felt the weight of what Abby was going through internally throughout this game. But juxtaposed is Ellie's Seattle Day 3, where she's fighting through a raging sea and numerous enemies just to seek revenge and correct something that she sees as a wrong. What makes all this more interesting is how Naughty Dog was able to take Abby, the character we all assume to be the villain in the story, and completely redeem her by the end. She doesn't just let Ellie go once, not twice, but 3 times, thus confirming in my eyes at the end of the game that Abby is the true hero of this tale, even if she started the tale fixed on anger and revenge herself. And Joe Kovchinsky says, "You're my people. I don't think I need to say anything else, but I will. Up until this point, I enjoyed the combat on a tactical gameplay level. After the scene with Isaac, for the first time in the game, I enjoyed killing enemies. I happily took out every one of those bloodthirsty wolves." I don't know if that's necessarily what the game's going for, is that now it's game on, you can kill all these wolves without any ounce of regret here. But yeah.
I did like the extra detail in those sections, though, how like every single one of those enemies is calling out Abby specifically by her name and like calling her out on that betrayal.
And it's interesting. Yeah, they're calling Abby out. I didn't connect it until right now, but it's also so clear that before that section as well, when you're going up against the Scars, or even during the same time when you're going through and both of them are there, they're all yelling out at Yara and yelling at Lev, calling him Lily. Like, it's just constant recognition, which is so weird to have in a game like this. But that scene with Isaac, that was definitely one of those things where if I could have just paused it at that moment and stopped and think, what is going to happen here? I would have no idea. But Yara gets stabbed a little bit, then still manages to take the shot to kill Isaac, and then they just unload into Yara. I had to go back and watch the footage again because in my mind, I didn't think Isaac was going to shoot Abby when she was like, "Oh wait, he's just a kid. Just hang on a second." I remember him like lowering the gun, but going back and looking at the footage, he like lowers the gun on 2, and then on 3 waits a little bit, and then is starting to raise it up and take that shot. So Yara was probably justified in killing him, setting this whole thing out. But
I think this is the island section is definitely where the game is like kind of making good on its thesis of like, hey, this is like a kind of a more violent version of what we were doing before. Here's like a lot of deaths that, like we said, aren't glamorized. They don't have like these like, none of them have like the like, they don't have a monologue. They don't linger on these deaths the way they linger on Joel's. And so like, you have that section later on where it just feels like, oh, the world is falling apart because, like the WLF and the Seraphites are fighting each other. And so you get to deal with them at the same time. And so this is like when the game is kind of crescendoing for the first time and saying like, everything is completely screwed. You have to go, you have to run. And which is to me like kind of this is where it's most strongly trying to make its point of like this violent world ultimately somehow creating people who are trying to redeem themselves. And I mentioned before that like Abby and Ellie are basically having the same arc, but they're like on 2 different parts of their like trajectory, right? Where like not to jump ahead, but Ellie is at the end of the game where Abby sort of starts. Is that she's kind of had a conclusion, and now this is her dealing with the fallout of it. And so you get to Abby's ending a little bit, like you get to Abby's ending at the beginning, and you kind of see where Abby is going, or Ellie's going to go by watching it in Abby's eyes of like, this is a version of what might happen to Ellie after the ending. And then, it ends with like, Abby kind of going like, I'm done. Like, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't want to be militant anymore. I'm going off to Santa Barbara to see if I can't actually help people now. Now that like my arc's, now that like my business is settled.
Yeah. Sarah Morgan writes in and says, Yara's death / Abby turning on the wolves to protect Lev was my favorite moment in the entire game. I was on the edge of my seat, terrified for these 2 characters I had grown to love even more than Joel and Ellie. Abby started her journey driven by revenge, and by the end was willing to sacrifice her life for an innocent kid, even if it meant turning on the people that she had once taken up arms with. I would love to have a chance to play another 38-hour game where I followed Abby and Lev on their next adventure. It's so hard for me to wrap my head around how anyone could play this game front to back and still not think Abby was a great character. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, but it is a confusing one. But I don't know how prevalent that, again, staying away from a lot of the debate on the internet surrounding this game and a lot of what people see as the toxicity and stuff. I don't know if a lot of it is just F Abby as a character. I have no idea. Travis Wayne talks about this moment and says, this moment is not only cinematically powerful, but is the entire essence and heart of the game. Abby's story and the game as a whole relies on this moment. Where I think, she says, you're my people. It comes together in a huge way. It's where the themes in the story all click into place. It's easily my favorite moment in the game, and I'd go so far as to say it's the most narratively powerful moment in any AAA video game. Bold claims, Travis Wayne. Sutton says, maybe I'm missing something, but after Abby and Yara find Lev on the island, why didn't they just turn around and go back to the boat? It seems like Yara's death and the dumb boss fight at the end could have been easily avoided.
I think they specifically call that out. I don't remember what the line is, but I think everything's getting too crazy. We have to go this way now because...
Yep, I think you're right. So Spencer replied to that comment on Patreon and said, Abby makes a comment asking this, and Yara says, I hear fighting in that direction. So they decide not to go to the harbor in Haven. So there we go. There you go, Sutton overall. Yeah, that was an incredible sequence when you're going through this section and it's all burning down around you. There definitely were chunks. It seems like flames is the thing that's really pushing my base PS4 to the limit. Every time there's like a big fiery inferno, like the frame rate starts to drop a little bit. But overall, I was amazed by just how well they pulled off this crazy action set piece, and it still seemed justified within the world of The Last of Us, even though it's like 50% of the population of Seattle going down in this fight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also one of those sequences where you look at in the distance at like, oh, we have to go there, and it's like this giant tower, and you're like, oh, that's like another 2 hours of sneaking, and it ends up being like a lot faster than that.
Yeah, you go on a horse.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a
solve the
horse ride.
problem.
Yeah, no problem whatsoever. Andrew Burns says, there's so much great stuff in this section. The game is absolutely brilliant, it turns out. But my favorite sequence for sure was on the island with Lev as the full-scale war between the Seraphites and wolves comes to a head. Watching them go to war and picking off the stragglers on both sides reminded me of the best moments of the Halo series when all hell breaks loose as the Covenant fights the Flood. It especially hit home here as Naughty Dog did a fantastic job of rolling out both factions throughout the game and building the tension leading up to this all-out conflict. Also, all I ever wanted in my life is a pet clicker. Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. I mean, they're cute for a little while, but once they get older, I don't think they're any good. Like if you have like a baby clicker, that's adorable, and we endorse.
So
it
how, like long term, how do they take care of themselves? Do they photosynthesize, or do they have to eat flesh every once in a while? Like how do those work?
I feel like they photosynthesize.
Wait, really? And that's how everything can survive? Or can the runners photosynthesize, do you think?
Or they get some type of nutrients elsewhere because, like, you wouldn't have the Rat King, as we now learned,
But hang on.
like develop and stuff. Like,
Yeah, what is he eating down there? I mean, does he have some sort of like vitamin D lamp?
Yeah,
Is he
here's some
cranking it
burgers.
down there in the basement?
You don't see a stash of like food and potato chips that he has everywhere.
Yeah.
Ugh, the Rat King's life is no glorious life. The crazy part during that sequence too, and everything was burning down, you're running through, like a couple times I feel like you just heard like pockets of children screaming, which was surprisingly effective. You know, it's like, you know, they don't want to go for an extreme rating overall. They're not going to show the slaughter of kids in a youngling style, but just having those screams off camera as you're booking it through that area, I thought really worked just to drive home how absolutely insane it is for you here. Let's see. Oh, Patrick S. wrote in saying, I can't stop thinking that Ellie seeking revenge was the driving force that led the WLF to expedite their plan to take over the island. In Abby's story, we later learn that a lot more WLF bodies are suddenly coming in by the hour, with Nora topping this dialogue off with the reveal of the death of her friend Danny. Immediately following this event is the reveal of the WLF's big plan to deploy their forces to the Seraphites Island. This moment stuck with me because we know Danny's death was actually caused by Ellie, not the Seraphites, when she was captured. We also know Ellie was responsible for the sudden spike of WLF bodies coming in, especially during this particular scene, with Danny being the connection for the player to make this link. In other words, despite not knowing Ellie was seeking her out the entire time, Abby is still experiencing the effects of Ellie's revenge. She's even running through the literal and metaphorical flames Ellie's revenge brought about. Very well put, Patrick. I mean, I think that's a correct read of what's going on in this game. I just don't think I'd thought of things in that way, that it all comes back to Ellie. I mean, they make it seem that Isaac is antsy to wage war, antsy to win, through any means, as they put it. But I guess...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I guess if there wasn't that huge body count coming in, I don't know if he'd have at least the way to justify why we need to do this right now.
Yeah, the reasoning to do it.
Right.
There are those notes about the truce and like how they're, they've been at war. And then I think it's some, I don't know. I don't remember if it was a note or a cutscene where I think Isaac just like wants to say like, no, I want to end this once and for all at some point. And then this just ended up being like, it feels like more opportunistic of like, well, now's as good a time as any. Like we have all these extra bodies coming in because Ellie and Tommy are forces of nature at this point. Yeah. So let's get on that island and finish them off. Yeah.
There was that moment then where you're Abby crawling under the rubble and your backpack gets stuck. And it's that weird moment of like, once you know of your backpack, it's like, well, are they going to give her stuff back twice? Or like, it's that weird moment of just realizing this is the end of the road for Abby. Like, I won't be playing as Abby anymore because I no longer have her stuff. I no longer have to worry about collecting things, even though in the aquarium, I was still looking around for things to collect when I just had to realize like, nope, it's just story stuff. It's just story stuff. It's such a weird relief almost when it's like, okay, leaving the gameplay behind on this island now because we got to fight the biggest, meanest person in the entire world.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this one is a prolonged death.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
Also, like, that was the maddest I've ever been at Abby of just like, forget your backpack, there's someone about to die.
Yeah.
But you remember all those sweet guns?
She's got I have 2 extra
coin collection.
You can't leave behind.
Oh, not my main coin. Oh.
I have
we never got a Minnesota coin.
I know. It's very disappointing, isn't it?
I was pissed. The whole time I was like,
It's just
I could beat that game 20 hours faster. I wasn't every inch for those coins.
It is an attack upon everything that MinnMax stands for.
Someone from South, you were like, listen, I know this is a bad time, but do you have a Minnesota?
I'll let you go.
Just let me know.
I will join your side.
Yep.
By the way, speaking of like collectibles on that island, it made me laugh that the scars are all like, the old world, hiss, hiss. And then they just have like scissors scattered around everywhere, toilet paper, duct tape. Yeah. It's like, the old world sucks, but we like their utilities. White Max writes in and says, can I just say that the fight with the scar, Seraphite, I love that everyone's doing this, was extremely brutal and graphic. I've been using bombs and watching enemies burst into a cloud of red mist, but when Abby stabs him in the face and gives him the Dark Knight Joker smile, I cringed in disgust. Excellent work by the folks at Naughty Dog. Yeah, I mean, it is that weird thing of, this big guy's going to be really tough to take down. But at least you're like in a fist fight at that point, and he really wants to kill Abby so badly. Yes. His entire face is being ripped off, and it's just... I mean, at this point, I feel like I want to kill Abby. It must be so satisfying to kill her because everybody's just dying to do it.
Everybody wants to kill Abby. Yeah, that's definitely like the pulpiest part of the game for me, where it's just like I put like at least one weapon into this guy and several blows, and this guy's face is completely disfigured, and he's basically the Terminator at this point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I was like, okay, what is he thinking right now? He's like, I'm already dead. I might as well just go in for the kill.
Yep.
I think that's what he's thinking. I don't know.
I don't know if that's the way I would act. I know it's a tough life out there, but yeah, there's a lot of amazing recoveries from folks. I guess that guy isn't going to recover overall, but just like, I just feel like if you get that level of wound in this world, though, you're pretty much dead. Unless you're Tommy, apparently, who can get half his face blown off and then he just is meaner or something. I don't know. We'll get into that later.
To be fair, everyone's taking like hundreds of pills all the time, so there must be some antibiotics in there,
Everyone's just too jacked up. Christian Garcia says, when re-entering the hospital as Abby on day 3, I think they mean the aquarium, they should have left some cabinets open, specifically in the kitchen area. I recalled my time looting the place up with Ellie, and it would have been nice if the game remembered it too, when you're on your way back into the crab door room and stuff like that. That seems like the type of detail that Naughty Dog would do, is remember what you rummaged and leave that open. So maybe they didn't. Christian, double check your footage there, Christian. I'm curious too, but that would be a fun note if they did actually do that. Ronnie Barrier has an interesting note. Ronnie Barrier says, when Abby opens the door to the aquarium after escaping Haven, the foyer, is that how you say the word?
Yeah.
Okay.
No one can correct you.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
The foyer is in the exact same setup as the one before the operating room she found her dad in, with the second door a few feet to the left. After playing the flashback so many times, the layout was etched in my mind, and feeling the dread struck me, knowing I'd find Mel and Owen like she found her dad. That's a really interesting detail. I didn't pick up on that. Curious if that holds up to scrutiny, if it is the same layout. Ronnie Barrier also says, I'm bummed that my theory about the Private Miller note turned out to be nothing. Apparently Miller is just as common a surname in the apocalypse. Damn it. Well, sorry, Ronnie. Sorry.
It is very weird though that they put that into the game, like that seems like such a conscious thing, a thing that you would be conscious about not doing. Not just having another character with the last name of this very important character that's already in that universe.
Yeah, it's either, they've got a million things to juggle and no one's going to consider that, or they wanted to leave it in there as a red herring because maybe they assumed too many people would figure exactly why she wanted to kill Joel, something like that, but who knows how devious they are. The part that killed me, and how dare you laugh, Charles, because we're going to talk serious stuff. No, the part that killed me is Abby seeing Owen and Mel killed. Like, that sequence was rough. And then specifically, it's the detail of Abby puking. Like, that is just like such a human note to insert there that I don't know. I'm trying to think if other games have even done that idea of like somebody puking just by emotional horror. I mean, it's not a very common thing.
Not in like a serious way. I think in like the, a cop comes onto a crime scene and starts hurling because they're the new guy there,
Yes, exactly. And it's like so gory. And like, I mean, I guess this was relatively gory, but it was more just the person, I think she would have puked if he just had a single bullet wound in his head, and then like when she looks at the map and realizes that it's just all her fault, that it all comes back to her, that it's just like this hunch from this person who I love too, that she thinks is Tommy. Even when she's back at the theater, she's like, he's been tracking us. She's just convinced that this person is Tommy. And it's just that fun idea of just her having no idea about this other demon out there. Really the only demon in the game, Ellie. Okay, Joshua Turner writes in on Patreon and says, did anyone else stick around and listen to the radio in the theater? The WLF confirmed that Isaac is dead, and we're trying to figure out what happened to the backup units as they were losing the war. It's pretty safe to assume that Team Jackson and even Abby took out a large chunk of the WLF that would have otherwise been well equipped to handle the ambush on Seraphite Island. It also shows just how much tunnel vision Isaac had when it came to the Seraphites. He still went ahead with the attack knowing their numbers were rapidly depleting. Assuming the WLF indeed lost on the island, what is now to become of the civilians left at the stadium? Did the Seraphites finish the job? The WLF disband? This war has been a fascinating subplot, which was made better learning that Ellie indirectly affected it. What do y'all think about the future of Seattle?
Yeah, I think that comes back to what I said earlier about like Naughty Dog's emphasis and kind of their strength is on like character arcs and making these characters that you really relate to. Because like even in like The Last of Us or the Uncharted series, you get a good sense of like, oh, this is a really strong character, but like, like the overall plot of like an Uncharted game isn't like like the part where they really tried to get the golden MacGuffin isn't like the thing that you take away from an Uncharted game. And similarly, like because the game is so isolated to these smaller areas, like they're not as interested in like the state of the world or like making statements on necessarily that on outside of how it affects the people living within those structures. So I think like the WLF versus Seraphite thing kind of being more of a backdrop than like we had like this is the important crux of our story is kind of in line with their mantra of like like our stories are about people, not events.
It's not about World War III. Yeah, right. Yeah, but if it was about events, what do you think happens?
I think they end up pretty cool with each other. It seems like I'm gonna wild prediction. Maybe if there's a part 3.
I bet they'll never touch on it again. Don't you think?
I don't think they make another game after this, or another Last of Us game after this.
Well, so I did see just a Twitter headline that Neil Druckmann, and I think the Kind of Funny interview or somewhere that he said that like I don't know if I'm going to work on something new or go back for Last of Us Part 3 in the future. So I could see them doing it. I think it's left with enough details and stuff, but we can get into that stuff later. Jeff, do you have any insight? Do you think the Scars are going to win the big game out there?
I mean, it certainly that radio conversation ends with like whoever is still left on the island getting murdered, basically. Yeah. And so it certainly seems like they have taken over their island and laid a huge blow to the WLF. Like, I don't know how many people are actually left in the stadium at that point. Certainly there are non-soldiers in there, but...
So I guess if all like the non-fighting folks were the ones left at the stadium, then they're probably going to be more compelled just to stay put. And then it would seem like the Scars would be okay with that. It seems like...
Maybe.
Or do the Scars just want to get to like the site of the martyr? Or do they want to take over all of Seattle? I don't think they did. I think it was just like, stay in your lane.
No, but at the same time, all their villages had just been burned down too. So.
Oh, right.
So yeah, the exact same thing happened over there where like you mentioned, like women and children were being murdered and whatnot. So like, I don't know whether or not they would have revenge.
Yeah, there's no one left to get revenge. It's just...
Yeah, at this point,
little babies. Okay, so we're back in the theater. I thought it was a little dopey, that scene where you come across Tommy and he's still talking about that gold. He's like, oh, you think I don't know fool's gold? Gosh darn it, I'm Tommy. It's a little bit like, okay, talking to yourself, it's a bit much. But I loved seeing Ellie burst out and like just that weird moment in real time of seeing it from Abby's perspective, just bam, kill Jesse. And then I don't know if this is intentional with the framing. I would guess that it is, but just seeing Ellie from Abby's perspective and realizing what a terror she is, but at the same time, like how small she is. Like it was just this realization again of like, oh, Abby's just like this scrawny little girl. Like just maybe compared to Abby's perspective, but it's that she looks so scared in that moment too about like putting her gun down and stuff. And it's just this moment of realizing that, oh, that's right. I've been building her up in my mind since I've been playing as her, but now seeing her in this moment, it's like, she's still a young lady here.
Yeah. And I think that kind of mimics Abby's confusion as well about like who the hell she is and what's her actual role in all of this. It's, at that point, it's just like, yeah, get out from under behind the counter. I've got the guy who's important and who's been, terrorizing my life at this point and killing all the people that I love.
Right. And it's just a quick pop in the head. I certainly thought that Tommy was super dead, and maybe I'm a robot, but I was excited about it. Like, oh, that's cool that they're taking that big of a swing here by shooting him in the head to make it be definitive, but alas, not quite definitive enough, which seems insane, but whatever. John Skavik writes in and says, you may remember me from such game club emails as the bar bends when Nathan Drake swings on it, and the guitar minigame is basically a fully functioning guitar. Yes, John, hello. All the worst parts of the gameplay in The Last of Us Part 2 are when it's looking for something specific from you, often without fully communicating what it wants. He's saying he thinks that like the sandbox nature of the combat arenas are the highlight of the gameplay. And he says the worst offender was the fight against Ellie in the theater. It was an awesome idea for a gameplay sequence, executed extremely poorly. There was no clarity as to what the game wanted from you, and it led to an infuriating 20 minutes or so of breaking bottles on her head and getting no feedback from the game that you're on the right track. I really disliked that there was only one way to quote-unquote solve that fight compared to the rest of the game that gave you a ton of tools and options along the way. Thoughts on that sequence, everybody?
There were multiple points where I thought I snuck up on Ellie and then was able to do the strike behind her. Yeah. But then like like a frame later, Ellie just turned around just in time, and then I punched and then I died. So there were a lot of times where it was like that I got frustrated with. But I also did like the idea of it, and I liked after doing it was the first section of me doing that where that happened often. After that, I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally into doing this, and I'm like, okay, this is getting more and more intense until it builds up to a climactic, oh, now everyone's here.
Oh my God. Yeah, I think the slow nature of that, I appreciate it because I'm a sucker for games where there's really important, and scenes in games where there's really important characters that are in the same room together. Like, I remember the Final Fantasy VII Deepest Dive. It's like, oh, that's so cool that like you're in the room and you get to see President Shinra like walk by you, like in gameplay. So there's something cool about like these two characters that the entire story is about, and trying to get them together. They're in the room together for this extended period, and you get to play it. And it comes down to a couple of boxes that you're hiding around. Like it's such a fun vibe. And then especially when you're seeing what Ellie's doing, it's like, oh, she's laying the traps right in the first half. Or
she's a little stinker. Yep.
Oh, she's such a little stinker. Or just her opening her backpack and it has the same sound effect of like, that's my backpack. I know that sound. I know every trick you're doing because you're me.
Yeah, I feel like I got really lucky on that fight because I basically did like all three of the things you're kind of supposed to sneak up on her like really quickly in like the same kind of like structure where it's just like, oh, go left, go right, and then I already have like 2 of the 3 hits that I need, and then she's like, oh, she's laying mine, and I saw her lay the first mine. Yeah, like she did it like right in front of me, so I was like, oh, I'll just punch you before that happens. Like I'm not. Yeah, I see what you're doing. I'm not gonna let you do it. I didn't have as much trouble as maybe the reader did, but
I like
I like the idea of having one of your playable characters fight the other.
Mm-hmm. Of course,
at least in that room, I think they do a better job of it than they do in the other part.
I like the I like the idea that Ellie's big move trying to kill Abby for so long is just Abby walks into the room and Ellie hits her with a board, hits her with a 2x4. It's like, what is this, Looney Tunes? Like that's your I know you're scrapped, but like, come on. I would expect something a little bit more than just, oh crap, is this gonna work? Okay, no, now I'll just run around.
There's a part where she paints the tunnel and she like has you try to run.
What was that part? I didn't understand what they were going for with that.
It's weird.
The hashtagonist writes in and says, after playing with Abby for hours, I became so invested in her story that when the two stories crossed over, I found myself instinctively taking shots at Ellie when I chased her down the theater. It was such an amazing moment to me because it's so rare that a game manages to truly mix the character's actions with the players. To me, it really mirrored the hospital scene in The Last of Us Part 1, where Joel's motivations and my own were identical, and I played the entire segment as if we were one character. Magnificent work by Naughty Dog. Unfortunately for me, the game then pulls the Lord of the Rings extended edition and goes on for way too long. Yep, I hear you. We'll get to all that stuff. Hashtagonist. Let's see. Yes. Did you all have thoughts on just, I mean, the big thing that people are writing in about? Did you have thoughts on this section and what you were rooting for to happen here?
Yes, I was. So one thing that I did mention at the end of the last Deepest Dive was like, oh, we're going to have it so that you're going to be switching between Ellie and Abby at some point.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, they're going to do it here when you're going to be fighting each other.
Right.
And I was thinking, like, I was looking, I was like, okay, maybe there's going to be one part where the camera pans over or like it does like a sweep or something. And then you're now playing as Ellie.
Yep.
And then you're doing like button prompts and whatnot. And there was one part where like the camera sweeped over, I think it was Abby's left shoulder. And I was like, oh, what's happening? And then there was button prompts. I was like, oh, this looks like it could be button prompts for either one.
Right.
And then it was Abby. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, that exact same thing happened to me where I was like, okay, I'm pressing this, and I is Ellie attacking now? Like, and I was into it, but then it turned out not to be.
I was definitely expecting that switch, and at the time I thought like, oh, they're making the choice about who is right for you by having like the perspective of playing as Abby kind of is pushing you towards like, oh, Abby is the character now. Like Abby is like the main character now. Like Ellie has become the villain, and like the part of what they're saying here is that like Ellie has kind of gone past the point of no return and is now a bad guy, and Abby's like the good guy, and the fact that you're playing as Abby means that she's right, and then they go on to the game goes on for little did I know that the game.
Yeah, little did you know.
There are no heroes and villains, Surreal. Don't you get it? This bad guys thing is nonsense.
Yeah. But I do appreciate the last letter because it did crystallize for me as well in my mind at that point where as soon as Ellie runs into the theater and you're chasing at she's like shooting and you're chasing after her, like I was on board and I wasn't really thinking about like, oh no, that's Ellie, I don't want to do this. Like I was doing it, and I think part of that is that I felt Lev was also in danger at that point, and I felt very protective over Lev at that point.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of helped get me on board to like, no, I'm just booking it towards her, and I'm chasing her down. We gotta finich this.
Yeah.
I didn't really like hesitate on that front because it felt like, okay, like they're gonna have me make the choice maybe later. And so like I'm not super hesitant about like trying to shoot it, because if it were the case that like as soon as you see Ellie and you shoot her, like end of fight, you shot her, like I think that
game over.
The game do that, and it is a video game, so you kind of have to assume that's okay. This is a boss battle. I need to make sure that I'm like doing well because this is like a challenge, right?
Seriously, what would have happened if that fight starts? And it's classy way. We're not talking like, Mortal Kombat screen, but the fight starts and it's like, choose your character. You choose one side. If you win and you defeat the other character, the camera shifts to that character and then it just says game over. And then if you choose the other character and you win, then the camera shifts over to the character that you killed there and says game over. Wouldn't that be thoughtful, you guys?
That would have been pretty cool. That would have been.
It's like the only way to win The Last of Us Part 2 is not to play.
Or what if when you shot Ellie, like,
solution.
if you could like kill her at the beginning, and instead of like an elaborate cutscene, it just cut to like when you die as the character you're playing as, and it does like that I don't know what, like the hissing sound effect or whatever it does at the end.
Yeah.
And plays that for Ellie. Like it cuts to a cutscene of her dying, and then at the end, like roll credits after that happens. It's like super sudden.
Hell yeah. I love that stuff. I mean, these are probably discussions they had, and that's what's cool about this game, is that it's so nutso that they did this. Adam Moran says, anyone else think Lev was going to get involved in that final fight? I was worried he was going to grab one of Ellie's guns and take her out or something. As much as I love Ellie, she would have kind of deserved it. The moment of the game for me is at the end of this fight when Dina runs in and Abby's just crushing Ellie's face, then starts crushing, what is it? So Dina runs in, attacks Abby, then Lev shoots Dina, then Abby's punching Dina in the face.
It's smashing her face into the ground.
Yeah.
I am, again, a serial killer robot here, but that scene destroyed me. Suddenly, like, rarely has this happened, but hand over the mouth, tears coming down, like that all happening that quickly destroyed me. Just that little moment of like, oh crap, Dina. Oh crap, Dina's face getting crushed by Abby. Oh crap, Lev's arrow. It's too much.
Yeah, so like I think at the beginning, because like building off of what I said earlier, like it definitely felt like they are kind of pushing you towards siding with Abby because like, oh, she's further along in her arc. She's kind of at the point where she's kind of turning back toward like, I need to be a good person now that I've killed the person that I was trying to get my revenge on. And this is kind of like a little bit of a turn where it's like, oh, Abby's going to brutalize these people who are trying to kill her.
Right.
This was like a little bit of a shift back towards the other direction of like, oh, maybe I'm not like 100% on board with what Abby's like doing at this point.
Well, yeah,
but it's a little more justified because it's like in the heat of the moment or whatever. It's like, I don't know how, like this scrawny little girl almost killed me, so I don't know how powerful Dina is at this point.
It's manslaughter when they bring her to the Seattle courthouse back there. Yeah. Well, Nick Richards says the part of the game that really got to me was the fight with Ellie as Abby. It was a big turn to play it that way. When Abby had Dina by the throat and Ellie says she's pregnant, then Abby says good. And Lev is pretty much the reason that Dina isn't alive. The whole sequence was awesome. Yeah, oh my God, that was an amazing moment.
Yeah.
I did kind of feel like, as you've seen both sides, you've seen so many killings at this point from both sides. It did, especially when all four of them are in there, it felt a little bit like Marvel Civil War, like the airport fight, where they're all fighting, but they're not exactly trying to kill each other. It's a lot of like holding your arms up and the knife kind of slashes you on the arm, like little stuff like that.
Fight where it's like we're not actually going to kill anybody here, but we want to make you think we will.
Yeah, I feel like throughout the rest of the game, you've seen them just be as efficient as possible with their murders, and then this time they're kind of stepping around a little bit,
Pulling in punches.
A little bit, just a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, and then Abby takes the high road. She says, "Don't ever let me see your face again." Walks out of the room. And I was prepared for credits to roll, and I would have been totally fine with that.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that was the first 3 times that I think I would have been okay with credits rolling.
Right.
Yeah. And I did like that. Again, it's kind of Lev pulling her back from the brink and, reminding her of her humanity and what she has to lose at that point from her actions. And it's kind of, you can see the same thing in Ellie at that point, even though her face is smashed in and she's in no position to do anything about it. But, I think there is that moment of recognition of like, well, at least Dina's still safe. And, that's what's important in this moment. She kind of finally comes to that moment, for at least a little bit.
Yeah.
And that also made it feel like it would have been a very satisfying and kind of obvious place to end it at that point. Like I really thought it was over at that point too.
Yeah. Jasmine, aka Rough Puff, says, "Wow, I didn't expect anything that happened after Seattle Day 3. I thought the ending would have been more of a Seraphites versus WLF conclusion, or that Ellie's group would go home only for Jackson to be attacked. What we got was a ride, and I was worried that we weren't going to get to play as Ellie for a bit there. Also, I hated Abby during the whole of Seattle, but by the end, I wanted more of Abby and Lev's story. I did grow to even like Abby a little bit in that short time, and Lev is a total badass." I wonder how many players were craving getting to play as Ellie again. Like Charles, as a huge fan of the first one, were you like prepared to be disappointed if you just never went back?
I guess I wouldn't have been disappointed. I would have been like, okay, no, that's a bold move of just saying like, all right, that's it.
Yeah.
But because we did go back, I also felt there was a level of satisfaction of like, oh, I'm back as Ellie. But there's also like the problem that was like, oh, this is epilogue number 3 at this point. So,
right. Well, according to the chapter listing, there's only one epilogue, and it's the very end. But
sorry.
the definitions,
epilogue part or C. There it is. There's a letter there. Here's
a thought. You know, I was thinking about while playing this, like these epilogues, these effing epilogues. I know structurally you can't do it. Storytelling wise, you can't do it. I'm saying spiritually, I wish we had more things like, was it Dead Rising 2? Was it Case Zero? Where it was like that prologue or Ground Zeroes? Like, I want more playable prologues from developer efforts and less bloated epilogues. I know it's confusing structurally in the story they want to tell and all that stuff, but that's what I was hoping for. It's like, I just wish there was some preamble that we could get just to tide folks over until the big release comes, you know, instead of waiting and putting all this effort at the very end. But I think a lot of people are ready to wrap it up here.
Instead, they just released the games early.
Yeah. So this location, when it starts out at the farmhouse, this was one of those things that I was so bummed was spoiled on Twitter. Like, I saw multiple people, and you're on notice, people, multiple people just posting like, finished Last of Us, what a great game. And then it's a shot either of the boat at the end, outside Catalina, or of like this grassy field. And it's like, what do you think? That's not a spoiler to know that there's this grassy field location that you're going to as some character? Like, it's outrageous.
I'm glad I dodged those.
Well, good call. But I was envisioning so much of this going down like, well, I guess I was about to spoil Uncharted 4's, but Uncharted 4 has an epilogue, I think it's fair to say. And I thought this was going to be one of those things of just like, okay, walk around. Yep. It's a nice little coda, and then we're out the door. I was not envisioning for this thing to keep going on.
Yep.
This house was so nice.
It's a nice house.
Like,
I wonder how property rules work. Is it just like, well, we found, like finders keepers, we found this house, it's ours now, we have to take care of it? Or if there's like, well, I know a place where you can go, but you like, for some reason, like you still need a lease and you need to sign this and you need to make sure.
There are no leases. Are you nuts?
Well, but I'm just curious as to what they do at this point. It's like, is it just like you found a house, it's yours, or did someone live there and they moved out?
If you own a gun, it's yours.
Yeah, they still have guns.
Yeah.
The part that blew my mind was the idea that like there's no boards on the windows, like, and they're just sleeping. Are there just no infected around this area of Wyoming? Like, what the hell is going on there?
They discovered that like putting a no clicker sign on your like fence just says like, oh, we're not welcome here. I get it, and they all just leave because it's like the one part of the game where you never see any zombies. The whole world could just be like this instead.
That one part that Dina was all like, oh yeah, the sign posting, they're not going to be able to read it.
See, there we go.
They're like, hey, there you go.
The ultimate callback. You know what I want? You know the DLC that I would pay $50 for? $50, ladies and gentlemen, in quarters. Is I want. Yep, I want the DLC. I'll ship it right to Sony. I want the DLC of Dina and Ellie trying to find this house, because Naughty Dog is so amazing at making houses. Wouldn't that be the best? Like, no combat, just them touring houses and arguing with each other about whether or not it would work.
Wait. So you're telling me that in this game, you would want there to be an extended sequence in which two characters build a house?
That's right, Surreal. Not build. Look for houses. And to be fair, I said DLC, not some epilogue that stretches it out into 13 hours of gameplay about gonna get my hammer.
Yep.
Jeff, back me up here.
Jeff, come on, chime in.
It's absurd, but I would play it.
I'd probably play it.
Okay, details in this house that stood out to me. Number one detail. Well, first of all, I was confused, like looking at the fridge, because like, okay, there's a Texas magnet. So are we in Texas right now? But those mountains don't seem right. But then it's like, okay, the Texas is just like a nod to Joel. Got it. But on the bottom of the fridge, the word cat is written. I was like, oh, this is Ellie with a subtle nod to her ex. Her ex is named Cat. You think Dina would be disturbed by such a thing? It's outrageous.
Does she know about Cat?
Yeah, they talked about Cat.
Okay.
I just think it's really out of line and the biggest, most monstrous thing that Ellie does in this game, and I think she needs to apologize for it.
That's when you thought Ellie might not be all good.
Yeah. Not my hero, I said.
Draft up a change.org petition for this.
There you go.
What did y'all think of the section overall, or just the environment?
The environment is really gorgeous. It's gorgeous.
Yeah,
it
crazy.
Was super pretty. I was totally with you where I was like, oh, this is gonna be that Uncharted thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yes, that. Then you button it up and be like, all right, and then it kept going.
Ain't no button.
No button.
It's funny that you guys like bring up Uncharted 4 because I also thought of Uncharted 4 when they kind of shift directions, which is I think the same thing that that Uncharted 4 did earlier on before its epilogue. I don't know if we want to get into the spoilers for Uncharted 4, but like there's a section where it's like, hey, we could keep going or we could back out. In Uncharted 4, like they make the choice of like, no, we have to keep going. And I feel like they kind of, towards the end, they pull that same trick of like, no, like I want to actually do this instead. Like you have the chance to not kind of commit to the final act at this point. And then the character does, instead of kind of like saying, no, you know what? Like the healthier thing for me at this point would be to stop with this obsession. Yeah. And end up pulling the same trick here that they do in Uncharted 4. And that was kind of like, I was kind of in okay, this is cool. I like that they're kind of shifting to, okay, this is what life is like after the kind of like the main ending. And then from there, from like when it says like, okay, well, I have to go back. That's sort of when it started that's when I started realizing, oh, this game's going to go on for a little while longer. Yeah. And it kind of, that's when all the endings start coming in.
Yeah. When I carried that baby out and sat on the tractor, and it has that tracking shot that pulls out. I'm like, oh, perfect! Boom. You nailed it. Perfect ending. Yep. Yeah. And then it just kind of zooms back in. It's like, okay, I guess we're going. But I did appreciate where it went from that when I guess are we talking about the sheep yet? Or did you have more comments?
Oh yeah, you can talk about the sheep. There's a lot of comments.
Yeah, just you find you get the sheep in, whatever. It's a little more kind of day in the life stuff. But I did appreciate that she kind of had that PTSD flashback, and you realize that like no, there isn't a pretty bow on this that wraps everything up nicely. Like she's still haunted by this, and she still has to see it through. And even though I was like, come on, Ellie, just let it go. Don't ruin this nice thing that you have. Right. Like, I appreciate where the story went from there.
Marquez writes in and says, the moment when Ellie was sitting on the tractor with JJ looking at the beautiful sunset that almost looked like heaven, all I could think was that I thought this game didn't feel right for Ellie to end up happy, that she didn't deserve heaven. While I was watching that sunset and thinking those things, I almost started crying just because I felt all of the guilt of everything that Ellie had done. Yeah, I had this moment in the house when she starts playing the music and Dina's like dancing by the sink, and it was like rage. Like I was mad, but like Ellie does not deserve any of this. This is not right. Not my Last of Us Part 2. Get that petition ready.
To me, it felt like this weird kind of like building on what happened with Joel, where like Joel kind of like this is the life that Joel wanted her to have, right? Like this is like ultimately, even though she obviously did a lot of bad things, but like the fact that like because it's like a very contentious thing of like, why didn't you just let them kill me, and my life could have been something, and then like this whole epilogue is like, this is why, is because I wanted you to have a life that actually that had nothing to do with this pandemic or like the zombie stuff, and I wanted you to have your own life here, and like Ellie gets to live that out. And I think it would have, like, to me it would have felt like, okay, we are actually learning from the mistakes of the previous generation, like the people who ended up causing this and kind of because of their own internal politic and kind of screwed us all over, to say like, we're going to learn from them, and I'm not going to be I'm not going to go back in. I'm not going to like kind of be selfish about my motivations to sacrifice other people for my own selfish motivations. And I think like if when Tommy came to visit her and says like, hey, we have to go back, I think for her to reject that statement of like, yeah, I know it's haunting me, but like if I go back, I'm just kind of repeating the same. I'm just kind of being Joel at this point, in that I want to be selfish above all things. And instead they go for like the more cyclical ending of like, I also want to, I understand why Joel would want to get revenge or like, not let something happen because of my own selfish desires.
Yeah, and I also feel like because she was just so roundly defeated by Abby in that last moment and like never got that closure, that it wasn't a completely like, oh, Ellie's in heaven now and she deserves this kind of thing. Like she was still living with like having to actively let things go at that point and not have that kind of satisfaction that would have felt okay with me at that point.
But if it would have faded to credits while on that tractor, you would consider this a happy ending for Ellie, though, wouldn't you?
I think if you include the part where she's like traumatized by like Joel's death, and even then says like it is not worth it, I think it would have been like, look, it's not, it's not like a happily ever after kind of thing, because she's going to basically have PTSD for the rest of her life. Mm-hmm. But she this is it. Like the lesson here would have been like, just let go of revenge. Don't it is not worth it to go after someone when they do something like this to you, because of the wreckage that you leave behind in your wake when you do something like that, which is what the game is getting at, is that like Ellie's personal tale of revenge is like having enormous consequences on everyone around her, and almost universally to everyone's detriment. And so like it is making a statement at this point of like, just let go. Just it is not worth it. All you can do is harm more people. So just let it go. And then like that epilogue is like, here's what that could look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's also, it's a mercy given to her by Abby as well, who has already kind of reached that elevated place and let her go and kind of gifted her with this, whether she deserves it or not. It's kind of also a nice way to acknowledge Abby's part in it and her ability to kind of forgive and move on from it.
Yeah, that kind of or like every breath you take from this day forward is a gift from me, or something like that.
Right,
which is not as menacing.
Well, it's the opposite,
which is like a way to kind of reverse what the game is about at the beginning, which is like these cycles of violence of, Joel killed my dad, so I'm gonna kill Joel. So Ellie wants to kill Abby, and so like this whole thing of like just murder cycles, and then for them to Abby to start this cycle of like reversing it towards forgiveness, and Ellie following through of like, okay, you're letting me go again for the second time, so I'm just gonna like continue that cycle by not giving into revenge at this point.
Yeah, instead of in the theater, which said, all right, I had forgiveness for you and you wasted it. In this way, it's like, all right, I have forgiveness for you, and now Ellie is not wasting it; she's making the most of it. But what if we went for one more round, everybody? We'll get to that later.
Which is really conflicting for me, because I think like this next section is like visually probably my favorite part of the game.
Yes. Hey, we're not there yet. We still have more of Wyoming to unpack here. Lewis Kane says, was I the only person that had an extremely overwhelming sense of dread during the entire baby segment with Ellie on the farm? I was like 100% sure that baby was going to get munched by a mushroom.
I mean, I also kind of had I was like, something bad's gonna happen at some point. But then it was the PTSD part that I was like, okay, then I am no longer worried. Well, I think this is the thing that we're focusing on.
It's really worrying though, just because baby JJ is just like, as Ellie's walking around, just like staring directly into the camera with his little eyes, It's like, all right, scary baby eyes staring at me, he's wandering around there.
It's continuing to be surprisingly hard to create an anime as like digital convincing beings that don't look kind of creepy. Mm-hmm. Or are kids just inherently creepy? Is that like, I don't have a kid, so I guess, I don't know.
Yeah, just Google kids. Look at Google Images for a while and you tell us. Douglas DeLong says, when Ellie put JJ in the sling, I had flashbacks of Joel carrying Sarah at the beginning of the first game, and I was terrified that JJ was going to get killed by someone hunting Ellie. Instead, we got the arguably more painful scene of Ellie leaving. Yes, we'll get to that. Hey, is this obvious? JT Fels, just as a throwaway comment on somebody else's post, said, okay, what's the baby's name, ladies and gentlemen?
JJ.
Does anybody know why the baby's name is JJ?
Jesse Joel.
Well, there we go. Jeff, you got it. Well done. JT Fels says, yeah, I assume the baby's just called JJ for Jesse and Joel, which is a very clever thing that I did not consider. I was going with Jar Jar. I didn't know.
And I think one of the letters or someone refers to the kid as Jesse at some point.
Oh, really?
I thought they made the connection at least with Jesse at some point, but maybe not.
I guess
it could also just be Jesse Jr.
Oh, yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I assume that was in the letter. I don't remember that being in the letter on the table, but yeah, it could be. Steve Bamdad says, in Jack and Daxter, there was a power cell. By the way, did we talk about the previous Jack and Daxter Easter egg in the Deepest Dive, where Abby picked up the precursor thing?
The actual, was that what that egg was from?
Yeah. It's the one that Kyle Hilliard had on his desk forever. I don't know, maybe we didn't mention it. Anyways, Steve Bamdad says, in Jack and Daxter, there was a power cell you could get by herding yak into a pen. It might be a stretch, but I felt that the sheep herding at the farm may have been a small reference to this, but maybe I'm just too obsessed with Jack and Daxter. It was 100% an homage just for you, Steve. We promise.
Yep.
I considered it an homage to the Navajo chapter from Beyond Two Souls, because it really felt a lot like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of Twilight Princess and how that came.
Oh, all right. Yeah, it's an homage to everything.
Hurdy-gurdy. That's what this was.
Perfect. Here's an impossible topic. Do you think that Ellie, when she's like, ooh, that dancing's really working for me, and she really wanted to go to bed with Dina throughout this sequence, was that just like, oh, Ellie's just like playful, showing she has like this sex life moving forward? Do you think Naughty Dog had discussions about like, is Ellie using sex as a coping mechanism? Do you think that discussion happened in that studio?
It never occurred to me, but it's, I mean, because I think it's not maybe something that is supposed to come up at first, because you don't know about, how traumatized she is, although you can kind of assume.
Yeah.
But maybe it's something you put together after, but it, like, I never really thought of it. It did feel more playful than like, oh, I need this.
We just need like some lighthearted stuff. So let's go for that.
Yeah.
Let's kiss them next. Tactical Dreamer writes in and says, did anybody else find Tommy's drastic change of personality when he visits Ellie near the end jarring? He was always such a family man, and for him to even ask Ellie to abandon her family to keep chasing revenge seemed out of character. But treating her like dirt after she refuses was bizarre for what was established for that character so far. A lot of people wrote in about this, like, what is going on with Tommy?
I mean, that's because he's like a shell of a man at this point and still driven by his revenge, and that, I thought that juxtaposed very nicely of like, hey, Ellie, this is why you don't want to go down this path. It's ruining what's left of Tommy's life. Like, don't do it. Yeah. But then she did it.
Yeah. But I mean, it does feel like really flippant, but like, I would totally be, I kind of understand Tommy of like, no, you like, I was ready to just be done, and you kind of pulled me back, like you kind of pushed me to go back in and help you.
Well, that was all a front from Tommy though, right? Didn't he just want her to stay in Wyoming, then he was going to take care of it?
No, I'm talking about early on, like the fact that chasing after Abby the first time.
I know, but Tommy was like, you stay here, but I thought that was all just him misleading Ellie so that she would stay so that he could sneak out, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I read that as very much like he was saying, hey, this is going to be impossible. Like, let's not do this. And Ellie made it clear, no, I'm doing this with or without you. And at that point, I read it as Tommy thinking like, well, all right, I'm going to get out ahead of her and do this myself.
Interesting.
So,
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think this is him kind of being like, like you started this, you need to finish it because it has cost me. But I don't know, like, I guess I'm not totally clear on how much it cost Tommy besides like a near-death experience, right? It's not like he lost someone dear to him after Joel, obviously.
Right. Well, I think in a way he did. I mean, I think something that could explain his change of behavior is, one, he had a bullet go through his skull. Right. And number two, that he lost Maria, that he makes a mention about them being separated again. So I think he's in a bad spot physically, emotionally. You never know what else is going on there. So I think there's some explanation. You don't really have a good sense of how much time has passed, but yeah.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell if he's like missing an eye at this point or if he's blind in one eye. He looked very kind of squinty, and he was just a mess at that point.
I thought it was weird that he was like clicking around the environment to find out where to go with echolocation.
And then in the cutscene, they had like the little stealth indicator that was kept creeping up.
Yeah, what was going on?
Yeah, I was like, oh, are we in this now? Yeah.
I did love that line from Dina. It's one of my favorite line readings of the game, where Tommy's describing this, and then Dina is just like holding JJ, and she's like, well, we're done with that. So like, just like it's such a beautiful little moment of like, nope, this isn't going to happen. And then I love when she like walks out after Tommy and just like tears into him, like, what the hell are you doing, dude?
I think, it like the kind of her trying to bottle this before it gets out. I think like it reads so much into that line delivery.
Yeah. Vasco Marquez says, I left the game with one question. What happened between Tommy and Maria? Do you think it's related with Tommy's thirst for revenge, which took him to Ellie and Dina's, or something different, like Tommy cheating on Maria with Esther? This is where things get complicated. Who's Esther, you ask? The first scene we see in the game with Joel and Ellie together, the Pearl Jam song scene, was an adaptation from a short stage play that happened some years ago, which portrayed this conversation, but added a romantic interest for Joel. Because remember they had like their alternate ending for The Last of Us a long time ago? Apparently that was this. I need to go back and watch that again. So Vasco's saying, what if Tommy felt the urge to be close to Joel again and searched that proximity through connecting with Esther? That seems like a bit of a stretch, but it's an interesting idea overall.
It's possible, but it definitely feels more like their split was due to like you can't just keep going out without telling me. Like every day you're not here means that you could never come back, right? So I'm tired of you doing that to me. Sort of where I was the way I read it as like, you can't just keep doing this.
That's interesting. This was another one of those big epiphany moments when the flashback started at this point. And you go back to that dance scene. Like, I know we had talked about it before, but when's that dance scene coming? I completely forgot about it. It was one of those like, oh my God, how did we not predict that it was going to be at the end here? And it was just perfect. Like, it's just another reminder. I think the marketing for this game has been brilliant overall. Like, that's so crazy to include this clip from the end of the game as one of the first things you show.
Well, yeah, that's still how I felt, and I don't know if that struck me as brilliant in the moment, because I was like, how the hell are you going to show me, like, when I'm that far into a game, you know, and there's like, well, I guess there was still a couple hours left at that point, but like, I want everything to be new, and I don't want to be thinking about how I saw this 3 years ago at an E3 or whatever, like that. That was jarring to me. It's a little bit okay because it is kind of showing a conversation that we've already known about, and we kind of had a sense of what those events were. But then I was still like, oh my God, I can't believe you showed us a cutscene from almost the end of the game. What are you doing?
Right. Hey, I mean, yeah, this is all right there. The context is right there. Caleb Murray says, I wanted to bring up what, in my opinion, is quietly one of the best lines of the game, where Dina's pleading, we have a family now. She doesn't get to be more important than that. Talking about Abby. Caleb says that just slayed him. This entire section, when Ellie's saying that like she can't sleep or eat, and she's writing in the journal about she had a remarkable day because she wasn't thinking about Seattle, and she keeps talking about how like her skin hurts. Like there's so many crazy details that they throw just to show like how agonized Ellie is overall. But still, you know, I've been on quote unquote Team Abby for the majority of this game here. And then when she decided to like pack up in the morning and leave, that was one of those like, all right, I officially hate Ellie. F Ellie. Like, we're done here. Whatever happens, you're on your own, kid.
Yeah. I put the controller.
That's right. That was the end of my game.
I wasn't completely F Ellie, but I also like the line where Ellie says, I love you. And Dina just says, prove it. You know, like, don't leave. Yeah,
right.
It's like, God damn it, you're leaving.
And it made me so mad then that later on in Santa Barbara, if you check Ellie's journal, she's like, I sure do miss JJ and Dina. It's like, yeah, no shit. Go back there, you idiot. It's frustrating. Anybody have any gut reactions? Charles, were you rooting for anything in this scenario?
I mean, I was just rooting for Ellie to stay. But I knew, again, I was doing that logical thing. Like, I know that she's not going to stay.
Right.
There's no way that she's going to not stay.
Right. Or that she's going to stay.
Or she's going to stay. I said that right.
She's not going to not take revenge on the knot in her side that is Abby.
Yes.
Sean Jeezy, do it easy. So stupid. I was extremely shocked that the farm section wasn't the end of the game. It could have been the cliffhanger leading us into another entry in the Last of Us series for next gen, and I would have been completely fine with that. Kudos to Naughty Dog for including the final stretch of the story instead of shortening the game for a cash-in. To call the game up until that point a cash-in is the greatest oversimplification. Taking the easy route, just making a 30-hour game with multiple playable characters.
Well, is he saying that the cash-in would be a third game, though?
Oh,
maybe.
I guess
I feel like they would probably still put in the same level of.
Yeah, it would probably still be another 4 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like the type of thing there's probably a conversation at least. I know that a lot of this discussion is, what are they talking about at Naughty Dog? But I mean, there must have been a discussion about, is this going to be DLC? Like, it would not have been outrageous. Probably would have rubbed some people the wrong way.
I think it would have been.
That would have been outrageous.
If they had been in DLC, people would have been mad, I think, of like, oh, you're putting the conclusion to this game, like you're locking it behind an additional payment. I think that would have been a cash grab.
Okay. But again, just another sign of Naughty Dog's power within Sony. They can really open those pocketbooks like maybe no other studio on earth can. Like, it's just an absurd spot that they're in here. But hey, we get.
I'm sure they didn't show anyone at Sony like the game up until that point, and then said, "Hey, guess what? We're making another 15 hours now."
Yeah, with multiple different environments. Shut it down!
What are you doing?
Oh my God. Bill Faulkner says, "I'd like to point out that my favorite small, minute detail of this game, which was the huge groan I made when the game went on longer than seeing Ellie and Dina with JJ at the farmhouse. Everything rubbed him the wrong way after that. I get it. There's a lot of people that just were upset by how long this game was. And I guess it's not even the length. I think it's the structure. I think is making a lot of people upset as well. But a majority, by the way, just for an overall read, loved the game, masterpiece level. But there's a lot of people split on this section here. Okay, John Bogan says, well, it started to feel a bit long in the tooth by the time you get to Santa Barbara. I must say that it became one of my favorite sections of the game upon reflection. The bright, sunny tones and sandy streets against overgrown hills of red flowers, just amazing set design as usual, and such a contrast with Seattle. Sorry, sir, you were starting to talk about Santa Barbara.
Yeah, no, this is like visually like my favorite part of the game. Like having, I grew up in like on the West Coast in like Anaheim for like a few years, and so like I have like some nostalgia for like the like West Coast kind of like Hispanic architecture. So like I was like, oh man, I love this kind of like the curved red tile ceilings. I'm all about this. This is so awesome, and it's like the overgrown kind of like walled off gardens and stuff. Like that stuff was all like amazing. I loved it. I like visually, I love this part,
and just the sound of like the bugs, the cicadas. It's just like I don't think we've talked enough about the art in this game and just how out of this world it is. And even just jumping from that Wyoming section to this section, it's like, we're making 2 new environments? It's just absurd. Shane Carley says, there's a moment when Ellie first arrives in Santa Barbara when she finds a note that says, rattlers are all through these woods. And for a minute, I got unreasonably excited thinking that JT Fels, who wrote in during part 1, got their wish. It makes perfect sense that clickers could be referred to as rattlers, and I was ready to pat the writers on the back for introducing an interesting regional variation on the infected names after all. Then about 20 minutes later, you learn that the rattlers are actually the gang that has Abby and Liv hostage. I'm not going to lie, it disappointed me way more than it should have. Well, you know, I'm trying to remember. They talked about different groups. I remember earlier on in the game, do you remember this, where it's like, well, this region has these people, these regions have this people. I forget if rattlers were brought up in that. I have to go back and check. Adam Moran says, when we first cut to Abby and Lev in Santa Barbara, we see black Converse sneakers like Ellie wears, but it's Lev wearing them. I thought it was a nice fake out, an interesting way to show the similarities between Abby, Lev, and Joel and Ellie overall. Speaking of Lev, I really like the way they handle the sort of fish out of water element of his personality. Being raised in a sheltered post-apocalyptic death cult, it makes sense he doesn't know the home addresses are broken up on evens on one side of the street, odds on the other. Yeah. It's always fun. Yeah. Nothing's more fun than fish out of water. Time tested. Steve Bellegarde says, for me, the happiest moment of the game was when Abby finally got in touch with the Fireflies over the radio. The small smile on her face and the subtle, hopeful tone in Laura Bailey's vocal performance was so perfect to me. It is hard for me to imagine that this hope that kept both Abby and Lev alive. It's hard for me not to imagine it was this hope that kept both Abby and Lev alive after being captured by the Rattlers. And Brian W. has a question. He says, there's been a ton of great animations throughout the game, but to me, the best animation was Abby calling the apparent Firefly numbers on the radio. There was so much tension building in her and so much time for the animation to go overboard, but it stayed calm yet frantic. So here's the question. Was that really a trap the whole time? I like to think it wasn't, but the voice on the radio definitely felt a little suspicious to me. Abby walked out of there with no concern it was anything but real. Is she blinded by her goal at that point? The voice on the radio is like pausing a lot, but then he has that weird moment where it seems like he recognizes Abby's father's name. But then he says, hey, we're at Catalina, and it looks like they go there at the end of the game, so it is true then?
That's what I got from that. It sounded real. It sounded like, oh, this is weird that there's somebody like calling us on this radio or on this frequency. But like, yeah, I don't think that it was like this is a trap, because it was hidden. It was not a thing that you would like typically find. It was behind a bookshelf.
They should have said, Firefly home here, in a big sign or something. Yeah, you're totally right.
There was a part in that conversation though where they ask like where Abby is. Yeah. And she tells them, and that was the part that gave me pause of like, oh, don't tell them where you are.
I thought that just Ellie was going to pick up on that signal, but maybe so those guys just have like an AM radio or whatever the hell that was, intercom system, and then they heard it and then just went over there that quickly to then capture them. I guess, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe.
Because they needed more slaves for their tomato plants. I was a little confused about what was going on.
I didn't know what they were doing.
It doesn't seem like they make good use of her by the time Ellie finds her. But
right.
That was also like the point where I was like, oh, they're okay. So they're, because I think maybe a cleaner version of this would be like for the world around them to not really care like about their confrontation. Instead, it feels like they play it a little more cynically of like, oh yeah, there are kind of like militarized kind of like bands of like, people with guns here as well. And so like they use that as, a way to have like human enemies in this final section. But yeah, like I think once I started listening to those conversations and she's like, oh yeah, I'm super eager to tell you where I am. That was where I started. Oh, okay. So like, yeah, something bad is going to happen here and it's going to turn into a whole thing at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was also thinking like the person that gave him the tip that place was there in the first place was also like might have also been in on it, but I don't know.
That might have seemed genuine. Yeah, it's a murky thing. Rick says, "Hey, MinnMax crew." Hello, Rick.
Hey.
Hi. I've heard a lot of polarizing takes on the final Santa Barbara segment. I personally love the entire section and relish the opportunity to kill a bunch of NPCs without having to face crushing moral ambiguity. It really did feel like Naughty Dog saying, "Okay, here are some objectively bad people for you to take down. They run a human trafficking ring and torture clickers for entertainment. No gray area here. Go nuts." Loved moving through this area, cutting clickers loose, and of course wielding that silenced assault rifle. A lot of people wrote in about that gun, by the way. A lot of people love that gun. Habib Adajare wrote in and says, was anyone else reminded of the neo-Nazis from the last season of Breaking Bad when dealing with the Rattlers? I absolutely thought of that. Not only for like visually, I think there's some similarities between this and New Mexico, but just that idea of like, it felt like we wrapped up the conflict and now, okay, but I don't know, what's some really evil guys? Neo-Nazis, or here we go, these people have slaves. All right, go for them.
Like the big guy that you encounter early on definitely had like a Dog the Bounty Hunter vibe. So that's sort of where I was thinking, oh, these are a bunch of like people who thought it'd be super cool if they had a bunch of guns and like tortured a bunch of like people. They definitely, this is like the one thing where they're just like, whatever, we're not going to bother like humanizing these people. These people are just like, yeah, just kill, just whatever. Like,
which bothers me because of that idea of, it seems like the entire point of the game is to show sympathy, empathy, forgiveness, all sides. You don't understand where everybody's coming from. Just don't fight each other. And then to have the coda at the end be, yeah, but this guy, this Philip Seymour Hoffman wannabe character, he's got to get killed hard. It's like, okay.
Everyone here is irredeemable. So like, it kind of pushes more of that theory of like, yeah, the world is a messed up place. Like the small pockets of humanity that you find are so rare because everyone else is out to kill you.
Right. Chris Hodge says they should have cut the entire island sequence in Santa Barbara. What was the point in Ellie going back again? Yes, I mean that's the debate, right? And so what do you gain from Ellie going back outside of showing that she truly cannot help herself?
Yeah, I think I had my that conversation with my wife, and she pointed out that like the difference here is that Ellie is making the choice. She has to make that choice for herself, because every time that she has gone after Abby has bested her and left her in a situation where she can't exact her revenge or choose not to exact her revenge. And so, that's what finally changed about the last conflict that we haven't quite gotten to yet. But yeah. I think the point was Ellie needed to make that choice for herself, and she hadn't had that opportunity yet. She could make it in the sense of I'm going to stop this pursuit, but she hasn't had the point where Abby is in her sights. She gets to choose whether she's going to pull the trigger or not.
I don't think she's hungry for a choice. She's hungry to kill Abby.
Yeah.
She wants. I mean, she wants Abby dead at this point. But I mean, I guess like part of the reason I struggle with the ending is like how much of it is like Ellie doing something that I didn't want her to do, so that's why I'm frustrated. Versus like I don't think it was like executed super well, and it felt like a way for them to kind of have it both ways, where they get to do like here's what happens if you end up not going after Abby. And then also, but what if she did go back? And then also, what if she did end up forgiving Abby? And then, like, also, what if it did end up like turning bad for her, right? Like, so it, like, I think they are trying to say something with like, here's what the cost of revenge is, with how it leads into the final, section on the farm. But it does feel like we want to hit every possible emotional note on the way there. Of like, we don't want to have to choose what the tone of the ending is, so we're gonna like just have all versions of the ending basically back to back to back.
It'll give something for people to chew on for 7 years until the next game comes out or something, right? I think thinking about this section, I think the problem is you don't have a goal as the player. We're not rooting for anything, right? When we're playing as Ellie, what are you rooting for? You're not rooting to kill Abby if the game has done its job right. You're rooting for them to shake hands somehow, but that's not what you're being guided to do. And so it's just left with this, I would call it storytelling mush. Maybe it's interesting mush, and I will learn to appreciate this mush like a fine mush wine. But that's the conflict. Is just there's such a clear drive in every other part of the story, and then now it's blah.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at earlier when I said like I don't know if it's like they had like a clear intent that they kind of botch, or they had like an ambiguous intent that they do all right. But I think like there is this kind of like they want this whole section to maybe feel empty. As like I don't know why I'm here. Like I kind of like you kind of end up you're already partially on the way there, and you're kind of like I kind of regret this. I shouldn't have done this, but I'm already halfway done sunk cost fallacy. So I may as well keep going. And like I don't know if that's what they were going for, but that's definitely how you feel throughout this entire section. Where I just felt like I guess I'm gonna have to do more clickers. And like it's kind of competitive at the like they don't really like the one thing they introduce in this section I think is that you see people with helmets for the first time. That's really like the one like besides the machine gun, like that's like which is like a weird thing to have, like finally the machine gun. That's like the one thing they introduce. So like the encounters in leading up to this like the finale aren't necessarily like interesting beyond the fact that it's a whole new location, and the layout of this is a little bit more intricate. So it does feel like, okay, why am I here? Which, maybe that's what they're getting at, but as like a player in like a scenario of this kind, it feels like why is this here? Like that was kind of my whole throughout this
with the armored guys is it here just to give you a final boss to have a tougher ramp up to the ending here instead of just the more interesting psychological amazing fight, I would argue, between Ellie and Abby.
It feels like it's building up to a denouement, but then it's like, this is maybe a little too long of a denouement, so let's split up with encounters. And like this is where it feels a little bit manufactured, with like the Rattlers not being far from the most fleshed out faction, and so this feels like the most tacked on section. Yeah. And I don't know how they approached it, obviously, or what the game was like in development, but like it definitely feels like this just needs to be here so we can get to this denouement that has gone on for a little longer.
No, I'm smart, so I know exactly what you're talking about. But if I didn't, which I'm not, what is a denouement?
A denouement is basically like a extended finale sequence, basically. So it's just like here's like a coda, basically, like in a book where it's like it's separate from kind of like it's sort of like an epilogue.
Yeah, isn't it just an epilogue?
It's like somewhere between. It's like
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say is I think it does. It's also giving you that section again, playing as Ellie, which we had talked a bit about before, where like. This is the big, kind of welcome back for Ellie's style of gameplay. And I don't know if it was just the way that I was playing through it, but I found this section a lot more action focused.
Yeah.
And I feel like the the enemies, I appreciate that the enemies just weren't as coordinated as the Scars were at this point. Like they weren't the most challenging faction, and so I had plenty of fun, I guess, just kind of mowing down some slavers on the way to this final showdown.
I had a tough time, like that last section in particular, where there's kind of like the dining hall and the outside area. I really had to keep going back to that again and again and again.
Same. Yeah, I was also in that same position where I think I also probably put myself in a little bit of a worse position where there was like a swimming pool, I think, where there's two clickers,
right.
And then there's a person rocking back and forth. I was able to sneak past that person and then like lay down, and then that was where my checkpoint was. So I was like, oh, well, what do I do now? So yeah, it was like, all right, that's it. I'm just going to go all out, use explosive arrows, shoot the clickers to go out, do all the craziness. And yeah, but that was a lot harder for me personally, I guess.
Yeah. Samuel Taylor says, I love the game overall and sat in stunned silence as the credits rolled. However, I wish the final gameplay section, infiltrating the Rattler's base, was a bit more climactic. I know the final fist fight with Abby was a true climax of the game, and it's basically just a quick time event. I like when games let you know you're in the final encounter and you can lay all of your ammo on the line, crafted items, strategy, all that stuff. During the Rattler's base encounter, I was saving crafted items and conserving ammo and ended up taking a full arsenal to my Last of Us Part 2 grave. Last of Us Part 1 handled this much better. In the hospital, I knew it was the end of the road, and it felt like an appropriate final exam for the gameplay I learned over the course of the campaign. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's always that hokey thing when it says, point of no return, use everything you got, but some hint of that would have been nice. But I guess without a partner, it's kind of tough to have that conveyed, unless Ellie just, instead of saying, Abby, and like repeating that, if she said something like, gotta give it.
This is it.
Yeah, gotta use all my ammo here. I don't know, there's no like, smooth way of saying it. Let's see. So Greg Laval says, so much to say. Oh, there's one section in the Rattler's Villa which left me horrified with myself. I was very low on ammo, and I went down the spiral staircase at the back of the house, repeatedly set trip mines, and turned that small area into an abattoir. Does anyone know what this word is? ABATTOIR?
No.
I believe that's pronounced Abbey Terror.
Into a little bit of an Abbey terror in and of itself.
Yeah.
It was genuinely disturbing how much gore I generated. But despite this, maybe because of it, this is one of my favorite sections of the game. The fighting was brutal, the enemies were horrendous people, and the desperation of Ellie just poured onto the screen. Okay, so he liked it. He liked going all out.
An abattoir is a slaughterhouse.
Just say slaughterhouse, you smart folk.
No, we gotta be
Mr. Denouement over here coming in with that one. Israel Roque says, I honestly would have liked more sections of the game that had the option of freeing infected and letting them do all the hard work. I specifically restarted the encounter where there's one infected and two clickers because I wanted to free them sneakily and see the chaos unfold. That was fun. I mean, in a section I wasn't crazy about, that was one of those things. Although I was trying to shoot the chain at a certain point, but you actually have to go up there and free them. And I like that they don't give you the cop-out of like the clickers avoiding you. Like when you're next to the clicker, they will absolutely target you. You know, it's not a matter of them only hating the slavers.
I was able to shoot the chain.
Yeah.
Really?
I did.
Yeah. It took me, sometimes it took me a couple of shots.
Yeah, if you shoot it where it's connected.
Oh. Well, Jeff, if you watched The Great Goaty Hunt this week, you know that I am an incredible shot. So it certainly was the fault of the game. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Let's see, just to go back in time a little bit with playing as Ellie in this section. You know, you're talking about just that weird groove that Ellie gets back in for just getting back into combat in this game, which, by the way, I was trying to figure out, like, the equipment that you have. Is that what you left off with? It'd be fun to track if it was like 1-for-1, like med kits and stuff. But I love there's this moment where after you take out the first stalker in the streets, Ellie says something where she goes like, back to it. Like, and it was like that, just every once in a while this game, what's the difference these days? This game like perfectly nails the way that I was feeling. And that was one of those moments of like, it hasn't been too long since I killed a stalker or a clicker, but it was such a smart little moment. Anyways, Darkfish Days says, in Santa Barbara as Ellie, I had a moment where a stalker appeared to be hiding in tall grass. It was crouched only with its head poking out. For a moment, I thought I was looking at a tree stump, but then like a shark fin in water, it moved through the grass towards me. I yelled, "Oh, hell no!" and jumped back. I wonder if that movement was conscious because stalkers move low to the ground and it just happened to be in tall grass, or do they have an environmental awareness and favor areas where they can't be seen? Either way, I kept a closer eye on the tall grass from there on out. I love this shark stalker moving. I also loved, this is such a cool idea, of when you go back to the boat on the beach and like entering that boat again, just in that completely different context, was such a cool vibe that I rarely had in games. And like you find the notes and see that like Abby's been writing to Owen, which is a sweet idea. And then, God, was it here? Or maybe it was it was in Ellie's journal then. There's that note where she talks about walking by Vegas that I love, where she said that Vegas was like walled off. And she's like, I assume there's just like thousands of infected inside those walls at this point, which is like,
Sure.
I mean, I don't think they'll go to Vegas in the future for Last of Us, but it's still such a fun little bit of lore detail there. Prestonanacron says, it feels to me that this game and Naughty Dog are being judged by different standards than all other games and developers. Complaints about pacing issues and character motivations just feel like nitpicks to me. This game is a high watermark for the industry, and there's not really much that comes close to it. It's a Hollywood blockbuster in a sea of school plays. I hope in the coming generation, other developers put more stock in story and character development. We spent way too long in the shadow of the quote-unquote Jill sandwich from Resident Evil. So here's my open letter to the industry. Dear video games, good writing or get the fuck out.
Jeez.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're totally right. Especially with something like Deepest Dive, we can get lost in the weeds, but it's important to sit back. I don't know where everybody else is at, but I mean, certainly in the top 2 of the best written games of all time, best performed games of all time. No?
I mean, I think character motivations is maybe a little, like, if you're discussing like a story to some extent, there is some merit there, but I don't know that pacing is maybe like off, like a nitpick, because I think it's my issue with the pacing here has to do with like the part where you interact with the game and you know, towards the end the story, but I don't think that like saying like the game is, you know, weirdly paced is like, oh, you're not seeing like the grander picture thing. I think it is like a legitimate problem for me, at least.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd also agree with that.
Yeah, that comment may be more directed towards a larger discourse than, you know, the one that we're having here of the criticisms that are being thrown at the game in other places.
Right. Jason Wojnar says, am I the only one who laughed out loud when Ellie was hanging upside down because her hair in that moment made her look like a troll doll? Yeah, I think you were the only person laughing. That's pretty messed up, Jason, but to each their own. Brad Gens says, I love when Ellie uses her immunity as a superpower. The best example is when she was caught by the Rattlers and one of them is trying to intimidate her with the hanging clicker, only for her to turn the tables by suddenly lunging into its reach, taking her captor with her. Sure, she got bit, but he got. Yeah, that was an interesting sequence overall. Somebody else wrote in, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, but somebody wrote in talking about like Ellie and infections and whether she's immune to like all infections. Because even if like she's not turning into or not susceptible to like the cordyceps fungus, wouldn't you think that like all these bite marks would just get normal infected? Or is that her power, is that she's immune from all infections?
I think they're just not acknowledging that non-cordyceps infections exist in this world, considering all of the cuts and stabs and, you know, arrows that people are getting hit with.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone in this game would be dead at this point.
Right. I forgot that moment too, where just in terms of brutal kills, it's not quite as brutal as Mr. Slippy Jaw there. But but the moment when Ellie like gouges, I think, is it the prison guard's eye? It's very 28 days later, like, wow. That was brutal, you guys. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anyways, Nate Washuda writes in, he says, when I got to the pillars, I started looking for Abby and spotted a woman with a ponytail silhouetted against the sky. Mm-hmm. I thought for sure it was Abby, so I ran up and nothing happened. I assumed there'd be a button prompt, but one never popped up. I looked around, tried to see if I was supposed to circle around or climb a pole to cut her down. Eventually, it asked if I wanted a hint, and the camera swung around to show Abby.
Oh, yeah, I also totally got lost there.
Really?
Because that ledge, right, I think that's pretty close to her, where she's like, oh, I can't get up on this ledge. Because I guess, I don't know if they force you to, but like, were you guys all like super hurt by the time you got down there?
Yeah.
I think,
Well, yeah.
I don't remember how much that is baked in. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess it is baked in.
in.
If we were all pretty much hurt there, so that she does the thing where she's like, I can't get over this ledge because I'm so hurt. So I was looking like, I guess I have med kits, but it's not letting me do anything. Do I need to find like a narrative thing to help me get over that ledge? So I was trying to solve the puzzle of like, how do I get over this ledge that I should be able to get over? Instead, I wasn't even looking for Abby. Like, I didn't even think to look at the trees, and at some point, it just like automatically triggered and moved the camera up to her.
Yeah. The ponytail lady got me, and then I figured I had to go over to where that ledge was. That's where I was supposed to go, and that's where Abby was going to be. And just as I was going that way, I noticed that one of the ladies was moving, and it was like, oh, do I want to cut it down or whatever?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah, like that's a nice thing to do or something. But I still hadn't put it together until, it zooms in. It's like, oh my God, that's Abby.
It's
like
so nutso what she looks like.
And
yeah.
Her changes and Ellie's changes at that point, like just the, actual physical changes that both those characters have gone through is storytelling in itself.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That was maybe like the closest thing that I come to a conspiracy theory is like that they make Abby kind of like super swole so that you would notice that she's emaciated in this scene, because she's still like, she looks like her arms are like noticeably smaller in this because she's been up there for a while. But so I wonder if they're like, we want people to notice this, so we're kind of overcorrecting like by making her arms larger than like most people see as natural.
I mean, I bet the character design came first, and then
let's just shrink this down.
Yeah, that'd be a silly conspiracy theory, but I like it. I like where you're going with it.
Like I said, I'm not like super bought into it, but like the thought did cross my mind.
Sure, just to have that change. Did you guys, not to jump too far ahead, but did you guys unlock any of the concept art and stuff during the game or after the game? Because it was super fun to see like some of their early sketches for Abby's design. I was really curious what they're going for, and like some of them looked so close to, who's that actress that I like a lot? With the face. She's in like the Bourne series. Julia Stiles. Julia Stiles. Where were you guys? Julia Stiles. Anyways, some of the early sketches look like that. But sorry, did you guys look at the concept art at all?
I poked around in the model viewer, but I didn't end up like unlocking anything. Like I didn't do that because immediately after I beat the game and the credits rolled, and then I turned off the PS4, went outside and did the thing. Immediately after I did that, my dad was like, "You done? Cool." And for since the last deepest dive till I finished playing the game, he caught up to where I was, and then was like, "Cool, let me play." And then he finished the game, and he was watching me for that last part, so he was like, "Yeah, I want to do this." And he was like, "Yeah," and now he was doing a new game plus. I was like,
"Wow,
all right, Dad."
I like that idea of like, I've got to get in on this. Yeah. That's crazy. Did he have any hot takes?
No, not really, actually.
Okay.
He didn't really have much in terms of hot takes. He just really likes the gameplay a lot.
Okay. Well, you're not alone, Charles, in this world. I just wanted you to know that.
Okay. I'm glad that I'm not alone.
Okay, here we go. I found it. Andrew Lerma, he says, "My father is 63 years old and in many ways is a somewhat typical American man in his 60s. He loves a good action movie. He doesn't go out of his way to be politically correct all the time. He is by no means a racist or a bigot, but he also doesn't go out of his way to educate himself on modern culture and societal movements regarding gender, sex, and race. The Last of Us 2013 is easily my father's favorite game of all time. He really connected and identified with Joel and was heavily invested with Joel and Ellie's relationship. He hasn't made a single complaint or critique of the more quote-unquote progressive elements of The Last of Us Part 2 in his playthrough, nor did he throw a fit early on when witnessing Joel's early death. One of the greatest accomplishments I see in this game is how effectively it exposes the player to diverse characters, challenging them to empathize with perceived enemies and others. The Last of Us Part 2 is deserving of the title of masterpiece in my book." This little father connection there. That's a good point from Andrew. Okay, back to this effing beach. Hurley 13 Tank says walking out to that beach was a punch in the gut. Scanning all those people for a familiar face, then finding what I thought was Abby and thinking the game failed to load or something because I couldn't interact with her. So I thought maybe I'd have to interact with Lev first. Then I found the real Abby and my heart broke. She's a husk of her former self and can't even imagine what she and Lev have endured over the past months. P.S. I bet we find out in either DLC in the same vein as part 1's or in part 3 what happened to them. I would hope that they wouldn't show that period about like just like a prison escape. That doesn't seem, I don't need more of the Rattlers in my life in any way. I love when Ellie cut Abby down. There's no big discussion. I love that Abby is just like, not even thank you, just okay, to the boat, get Lev in the boat, get the hell out of here because obviously Ellie's beyond a wild card at this point and they're just fried. I just love the idea of like, there's no amount of reasoning they want to do. It's just like, you gave me this opportunity. I'm now going to walk quickly towards the exit and get the hell out of here. I thought it was a really fun read.
All the opportunities they give you to not do this. I'm going to show you what it's like when you actually take them.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Let's see. Joe Smith says, in my humble opinion, this game has become the new champion for the climactic fistfight, dethroning Metal Gear Solid 4's historic match between Snake and Liquid Ocelot. The fact that I was an almost unwilling participant in this desperate scrap between two utterly exhausted characters and the fact that I felt like I was on the wrong side really pushed it over the top for me. Yeah. Did anybody else think of that Liquid and Snake fight?
I didn't think of the Liquid versus Snake fight. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I wonder if they were thinking of it internally as well. Jeff, you're not a Metal Gear guy, right?
No, I don't know what that is. So.
Okay, well, at some point, if you want to be a maniac, you could watch this Liquid Ocelot versus Snake fist fight because it's an absurd thing that goes on for a very long time. It's very funny.
I remembered, I was thinking of the Uncharted 3 fist fight at the end.
Oh, okay. Where was that one at again?
You were like on a pillar thing, and then it was just you punching, what's his face? Rafe? Yeah.
Well, Rafe was in 4.
Oh, no, yeah, not Rafe. Oh, man. Well, the guy who disappears into a wall and no one knows where he went.
Yeah. I know what you mean. The guy who's like the actor was in The Hobbit, so he had to bow out of it or whatever.
Yeah, I don't
Simon. Something like that. Anyways, David Gilman writes in, hey, David Gilman, everybody. He says, I can't think of a game that compelled me to purposely lose the final boss fight before. When the last fight between Ellie and Abby began, I just had Ellie stand there and let Abby take her down with the hope that doing so would let Abby live. When that produced a fail state, I worked through the gut-wrenching fight and stopped a second time when Abby was on her hands and knees in the water and a prompt came up for what I assumed was going to be the final blow. I just couldn't go through with it. Witty Nickname here says, I have never had less want to take on a boss fight in a game than in the scrap with Abby on the beach. There could be no winner. It was the most reluctant button-pushing exercise I can remember participating in over 3 decades as a gamer. Nick McKernan says, during the ending fight, Ellie is drowning Abby. The camera begins over Ellie's shoulder, keeping her in a position of power before gliding down to the water level. Here, the perspective shifts. Instead of us viewing the scene from a dominant angle, the audio becomes submerged, and suddenly we're the ones drowning, inhabiting Abby's perspective. This shot conveys the theme of a duality and perspective in one incredible gliding movement from the camera. It's just an amazing moment of filmmaking, like a proper climax. It felt like everything was building to this one shot. Good note, Nick. Overall, yeah, that shot is interesting. It doesn't exactly go from Abby's perspective, but it just comes down that little bit. Where is everybody at in this fight? How are you feeling about it?
I think that this is the point, or this is where I was like, because I said that this is Ellie's story, I was more of a willing participant to be like, okay, this is what Ellie would do.
She's got it.
This Ellie really, Ellie just like needs to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I don't want Ellie to do this, Ellie apparently like really needs to do this. And I was so rooting for her to just stop at some point.
Right.
Yeah, I was heartbroken when, she goes over to Lev and threatens to kill, an unconscious boy just to force this thing to happen.
Right.
And then I went through if you needed any other reason to see Ellie as the actual villain of this game. Yeah, because
Abby's like, I'm not doing this. Like, you're not getting what you want.
Yeah. And basically just standing there like ready to die herself because she won't go through with this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and then I had the exact same experience that one of the previous letters said, where I failed that fight because I didn't want to do it, and then Abby got up when she was kneeling down, and attacked me once as well because I didn't want to go through with it. But when I finally did, I was okay with it because of how it ultimately ends. But I was really not a happy camper at that point.
Yeah, I had a moment where I lost the fight, and I think, God, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Abby even like snaps Ellie's neck. And it was like the death animation. I thought like, this is canon, canonical death animation, and not like in a cheeky way. Like I genuinely thought like, oh, this was supposed to happen. That's awesome. Okay, game over. I guess I have to actually win this thing. Go ahead, Cyril.
I was a little closer to Charles, where it's like I don't necessarily see this as me. Like the game never really explicitly gives you a choice, right? So I didn't think it was like, oh, is there a way to like circumvent this fight and somehow get Abby to win? Like I just feel like let's just keep going through this. Let's see this like kind of to its resolution. And I was in line with Charles, where it's like Ellie's at this point, and I figured she was going to go all the way. And it's like this is the thing that she wanted to do. So here it go. Like I was kind of like sarcastically being like, all right, Ellie, here we go. Like this is what you wanted, right? Like
go get some. Yeah.
Like, this is.
Yeah. I was really struck, and I should have seen it coming. It's a very like Abyss-esque for how long you think that Abby is under that water and super dead and not coming back. I did go back and rewatch it and held my breath just to check it. Like it wasn't that hard to hold my breath for that long, so it wasn't all right. But I thought for sure, I shouldn't be so naive maybe, but I thought for sure like, okay, this is how Abby dies. Like anybody have thoughts on whether or not she was going to be drowned there?
I was very worried about it.
Yeah.
It certainly looked like it. Yeah.
Seemed that way. Gabriel Loque asked, why do you think Ellie spared Abby in the end?
My guess is that it was, or what I think that they were trying to get at is that one flash, or it was like a flash of Joel
with the guitar.
Not even with it was at his house, and he was like sitting there.
Yeah.
And like, it was a cutscene we haven't seen yet at that point.
Yep.
But it was like, oh, because she's remembering this, and she remembers her saying like, I'm willing to try to forgive.
Yep.
I think that was the moment where she was like, this is it, because there were still, again, like exhausted, tired, all of this stuff happened, literally her fingers were bitten off and like all of these things, and then she was just like, why am I doing this? Maybe I should, is there something else that I should look into doing rather than this? Is this worth it? Am I being fulfilled? And it seems like that moment of thinking back to when she was trying to forgive Joel, that was the thing, was like, oh, I'm going to spare you, or like, I'm not going to continue doing this. This is no longer
give you the courtesy I eventually attempted to give Joel, even though you robbed me of Joel and robbed me of fulfilling that courtesy with Joel fully. That flash thing, maybe it's just because I've seen this clip too many times, but it reminded me of in the movie Creed. I don't know if you remember Creed, but there's a moment where Creed's like down on the mat, knocked out, and it's like flashing through all these moments in his life. Do you remember this? And then there's a flash of Apollo in the ring, and then Creed's just like, and he like stands up and immediately gets back in the fight, and they're like, oh, he's like a man possessed. Like it reminded me of that, just like the quick flash, and then just like bam, complete pivot. Anyways, Sidewinder17 says, did anyone else think that Abby was going to yell out as she's drowning, I found the fireflies? And maybe both realizing that there could be a chance to do another surgery on Ellie, they both agreed to sail to the firefly location in the hopes of another shot at a cure. I don't know about that exact moment, but definitely it's one of those things where it wasn't until I was Ellie in Santa Barbara that was like, oh, of course, like they're going to bond in a big way over the fireflies here. Like that's going to be the defining thing for them to really unite over. And then not so much. Yet, at least. Andrew A. says, I may be in the minority of this, but I felt that part 2 ultimately has a more uplifting and hopeful ending than part 1. I found in Ellie's arc specifically. Had Ellie gone through with killing Abby, she surely would have lost all the good left in her and betrayed the life that Joel wanted for her. She struggled to forgive Joel for his mistakes and now has hope to forgive herself for hers. The shot of her leaving the farmhouse that held her art, music, and memories of Dina is incredibly melancholic, as she lost so much of herself throughout this chapter and now is left to build herself up again. But there's hope for her in starting over. Revenge giving way to the potential for forgiveness and self-compassion is the story. Yeah, good point. Do you think, again, this is dumb to try and guess the creator's intent, but do you think they had discussions about the idea of Abby basically being crucified and then her being this constant symbol of forgiveness? That must have been at least a theme that was danced upon.
Yeah.
Right?
Probably.
Okay.
Probably.
Denal Coral says, my question is to do with Ellie letting Abby go. Does this make sense to you? I believe it was Daniel Bloodworth from Easy Allies that said the flashback to Joel as Ellie was drowning Abby was the moment that Ellie forgave Joel for the Firefly incident, and that this somehow carried into diffusing her murderous intentions for Abby. This makes no sense to me, because if she forgave Joel, wouldn't that make her all the more hateful towards Abby for taking away the only man who loved her dearly enough that he damned the whole world to be with her? Ellie is not necessarily a good person, so her turn here was incredibly bizarre. She has torn through countless enemies to get Abby, and to have this weird turn in motivation felt incredibly off. I'm open to the idea of missing clues towards this and or having my mind changed. My best bet was that she didn't want to kill Abby because of Lev. Although if that's true, this would be the lamest explanation for letting Abby go. I would love to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I don't think that her doing it because of Lev really. No. I don't think that's it. But like, I think a lot of what people are talking about, like, you know, whether like with the flashback and kind of like how that acts as an impetus, it feels like a weird kind of trick of editing where it's like they place this after that happens, right? So that you kind of feel like you tie that event to the fight in like near the boat, when I think that could have just as easily served the same purpose if that had been after like the first section in the farm. We just kind of ties to my larger point of like, this section definitely feels like them wanting to hear all the notes that kind of line up with her, like Ellie learning forgiveness, but we also want to have the face off, right? And so like we're going to instead move that flashback here so that it justifies this portion, versus if we had it earlier, which would have justified her kind of not going out to Santa Barbara in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that like there was impetus of like, oh, a flashback influenced the start of the fight, where it was this like she saw Joel's face again, like, oh, it's time. I should not let Abby just go. And it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're now fighting.
Yeah, I do get how it is kind of a trick like that, but I feel like it is put in this moment because that is what is going through Ellie's mind at that moment.
Yeah,
and I felt like that, you know, her inability to forgive Joel up until that point was a large part of what was driving her throughout this entire revenge tale, because she had felt like she had been robbed of her purpose in life by Joel to begin with, when she says explicitly, like, I was supposed to die there, my life was supposed to mean something, and you know, when Joel died, it like that kind of fueled into giving her this new purpose of getting revenge for that. And so it wasn't really until that moment when she remembered back to that and she finally kind of forgave him for that she was, you know, like that lust for revenge just kind of went away there. And that felt earned to me at that point. It didn't feel like this unbelievable pivot, in part because I had, for like 10 hours at that point, I've been like, come on, Ellie, like get on the same page.
Right.
That was one of the hard things for me that I still don't know how I completely feel about it. I feel like Abby's arc was so well done in terms of her growth as a person and our growth with her going through that it felt, I felt frustrated with Ellie this whole time of like, come on, you know what the right thing is here. Like, get to the point where I already am at because Abby got me there.
Yeah. Is this a dumb question? What is Abby's arc? What is her growth, her major growth by the end of this?
I think ultimately, like, learning empathy and becoming a human being again, and finding people that she can actually believe in and, want to move on with her life.
But it seems like she believed in Owen.
I mean, did she though? Because up until that point, she had kind of like, he was still in the background of her revenge for killing Joel. Like he was trying to initiate a relationship with her, but we could tell that didn't really go anywhere because she was driven by this other thing. So
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's just that the abyss after she got her revenge, trying to find new meaning in the life, and the new meaning in the life is to take care of Lev, the way that Ellie's new meaning in life should be to take care of Dina.
Yeah, but it wasn't for a very long time. And,
it was a swell 3 months. James Baldwin leaves a comment on Patreon and says, the way this game plays with narrative and perspective is just spectacular, in my opinion. A recurring idea in The Last of Us Part 2 is that revenge only ends when both parties agree to it. Interesting way of looking at it. My name is Dan, has a very interesting take. Says, hey, I tuned into a few Twitch channels where streamers were playing as Ellie for the last time as she was heading out to go kill Abby again. It was quite alarming to see some of the chat still rooting for Ellie at this point in the game. Even during the last 1v1 sequence, I couldn't believe the amount of people rooting for Ellie to kill Abby at the end. What does this say about the gaming community?
That is a huge question I had. I didn't look up much stuff, but I saw a couple like Reddit headlines that were like, this game is dumb because it's a revenge tale without the revenge, and Ellie should have killed Abby at the end. And I honestly don't know how you can come to that conclusion or still be rooting like, yeah, let's kill her already.
Is it just like
that?
Is it just because that's coming from those early leaks? And if you just read those, if you read the synopsis, then I kind of can understand where they might be coming from with that.
Yeah, I can totally see this as like a case of like them like kind of funneling their frustration about like, obviously a lot of people were upset that Joel died, and some maybe that coincides with like some of the way the marketing kind of played around with that, and kind of people's overall frustrations with the game, whether warranted or not, and that just felt like, well, I have all this like pent up rage, but I don't necessarily know why I'm mad. So like the fact that this didn't go the way I wanted, I'm choosing that as the reason why I'm angry, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's maybe why people are kind of like, oh, like this game sucks because like Abby or Ellie didn't kill Abby. Mm-hmm. But like I guess to go back to kind of my like the thing about from earlier was that even though I think that I don't think obviously I didn't want either of them to die, but like I guess from what I mentioned earlier was that like I don't think Abby is like necessarily like the paragon of like here's a unequivocally good character, because like I mentioned earlier, like she got her revenge, like all of her kind of like story of redemption is like comes at the caveat of like this is at like the story. The point from which we follow Abby is the equivalent of where we follow Ellie had she killed Abby.
Yep.
And then and here's what happens after that. So I like, while I totally didn't want Ellie to kill Abby, I'm not kind of like, well, because Abby is like the one who should like who's in the right here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Hunter S. Sachs says Abby took away Ellie's opportunity to forgive Joel, which is all Ellie wanted, a chaotic spiral into loss. Quote, if I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself, is how the song goes. Abby and Ellie completely deconstruct and resurrect themselves into new beings from their loss. Ellie lost all connections to Joel, but she learned to forgive him, just as she could forgive Abby, just as Abby could forgive Ellie. I've gone through great loss and can relate to the process of becoming undone and the inevitable process of seeking redemption and forgiveness in the end. I like the game a bit. However, the scene when Ellie comes back to the farm and can no longer play the guitar utterly floored me. Few pieces of art had affected me quite like this game overall. JT Fels writes in and says, my favorite detail about the ending is the lack of closure for Ellie. She loses Dina, JJ, her ability to play guitar, and possibly Tommy in a selfish quest for vengeance that she ultimately gives up on. She still suffers from PTSD, and Abby and Lev are arguably alive because of her intervention, which is one of those things that, I don't think I quite processed while playing the game. But of course, I don't think this story would have been worth telling had Ellie ended up with anything more than nothing. She's alive because of Joel's selfishness in the first game and is forced to start anew because of her own selfishness in part 2. It's a good ending that, in my opinion, justifies the existence of the sequel. Good thoughts overall, JT. Joe Halaska says, there's an interesting theory floating around out there about the ending that I wanted to bring up. Before we get to that, does anybody have thoughts on the ending in general, going back to the farmhouse?
I really like the permanence of like consequences in the game, just in general. But like whether it be like a physical permanence with like Ellie no longer having like the ability to play the guitar as she once was, or she once could, to like the mental permanence of like all the consequences of, oh yes, I'm gonna go seek revenge, I'm gonna go try and get like do what I think is justice, even though it might not actually be justice. And like I really liked that there were like consequences to all of these actions, whether it be deaths or physical or mental consequences and stuff.
Yeah. And James Smith writes down on that note, says, I think Ellie's 2 missing fingers are a metaphor for Dina and their child. Revenge has driven her to lose a part of herself she can never get back. In the end, she finally won the courage to play Joel's song, but it doesn't matter because you forfeit the ability to play it all and her chance at a happy future. Yeah, that sequence was rough. It's crazy, like walking around that house and being like, they took everything? They took the magnets? I know I'm very focused on these magnets on the fridge, but look, the magnets on the fridge, the crib, like that is some pack mule that they loaded up to haul all this stuff over to Jackson.
Hey, calls are free now. You can just take one.
That's true. But Joe Halaska wrote in with something. A lot of other people noticed this as well. So there's an interesting theory floating around out there about the ending that I wanted to bring up. Ellie is living with Dina, JJ, and Jesse's parents in Jackson after the events of Ellie's final encounter with Abby. This is premised on a few different things. First, in the farmhouse section, while Ellie is holding JJ, there's a note from Jesse's parents on a table telling Ellie and Dina that there will always be a place in Jackson for them and JJ. Second, in Seattle, Dina gives Ellie a bracelet. She isn't wearing it at the farmhouse or during the Santa Barbara section of the game, but she does have it on in the epilogue. If you check her backpack contents, there is not any reference to the bracelet. Well, it could have been omitted for no reason. It was remembered for the final moments of the game. Additionally, Ellie isn't armed at all upon her return to the farm. If that was the first moment she'd been back there and she came immediately after returning from Santa Barbara, she would likely have at least had a weapon on her. This suggests she actually left Jackson that day to go back to the farmhouse. Ellie looks significantly better than the end of the fight with Abby, and her fingers have somewhat healed as well. It's just a theory, but there are definitely indicators there to suggest that it's accurate.
I mean, the healing part is like any amount of, like, you spend enough time moving from Santa Barbara back to Seattle, I feel you're probably going to look a little bit better if you pay medical attention to yourself.
Yeah, it's nice that interpretation's out there. It could also just be, yeah, she knows that Dina loves that bracelet, that it brings Dina good luck, and she needed to put her best foot forward for trying to repair things with Dina by the time she came back, so she puts the bracelet back on. That doesn't seem impossible.
Yeah, and also they moved everything from the house except for all of Ellie's stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That's still in her room?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great point.
Including the record that Dina liked so much that Ellie would play for her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I like you arguing that, no, you should be sad about this ending.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I also read that note as like, okay, that's where Dina went. Mm-hmm. But, you know, like Ellie, the implication there being like, Ellie's obviously no longer welcome there.
Right. Rich McLaughlin, this is what the deepest dive is all about. Says, when Ellie returns to the house, they clearly show that she only has 3 fingers. My brain then flashed back to earlier at the medical tent when one random guy asks his buddy, still got all your fingers? To which his buddy replies, you only need 3 to do the job, right? Is this a dumb joke or clever foreshadowing?
I mean, it could be both. They could, I think, it might be both. Turn a dumb joke into foreshadowing.
Yes, I remember writing that down even about like, what a weird line. And yeah, I don't know. You know, it's a weird one. Patrick O'Connor says, musician here. All right, this is what the deepest dive is all about. Here we go. Says, I just want to highlight the attention to detail in the final guitar performance. There are plenty of incredible guitarists who are missing fingers. The issue isn't dexterity, it's Ellie's muscle memory. Naughty Dog went to the effort of analyzing which notes in the chord voicings would be affected by damaged fingers. Rather than fumble everything in a dramatic way, Ellie unintentionally mutes notes as a result of her muscle memory not accounting for what's left of her fingers. They actually took the time to think about exactly how this would sound and then sampled the appropriate muted notes. This made that small moment all the more dramatic for me in that Ellie could absolutely overcome this given time, but she chooses not to in this moment. It makes her letting go of the guitar and by extension Joel another moment of restraint and not letting go of the relentless emotional drive that brought her to this place. Patrick O'Connor.
Yeah.
Beautifully put.
I feel like they could have also recorded that by just having maybe a guitar player play that part without the.
Well,
without,
I think they did, yeah, but you get the idea. John Ford is wondering, so the moth on the guitar and in her notebook are important. She's drawn like a moth to flame to her own self-destructive revenge quest. Leaving the guitar behind, Joel's memory and the camera focusing on the moth symbol on the guitar is just layered in symbolism. Yeah, is that the easy read for the moth imagery throughout the game, and especially by the end where she's connecting it so much to Joel, is that it's just moth to the flame ideas?
I can see that. I was just more like, this mirrors the opening of the game, where it's just a picture of Joel cleaning the guitar.
Well, not only that, but then also the mirroring of the title screen for Last of Us Part 1 with like the billowing curtains and stuff.
Yeah.
I also wonder if, I guess I didn't look too closely, but like the few loading screens you do end up seeing, are those fireflies or moths?
Ooh, I think they might be moths. It's crazy that we rarely see that loading screen. A couple times, yeah.
Yeah. I also I didn't think about it that deeply in terms of the moth to the flame stuff, but there was that revelation of like, oh, she's been drawing this moth again and again on all of her journal pages because she's thinking about Joel, and she still hasn't processed all of that.
Yeah. Nasir Siddiqui says, I like how Naughty Dog concluded Ellie's quest for revenge by showing that she's ended up with less than what she had when her quest began. Her thirst for vengeance literally cost her the life of her friend Jesse, her relationship with Dina and JJ, and her fingers, showing that the price for seeking revenge is steep and irreversible, both emotionally and physically. Dina leaving Ellie's room, the only one untouched in the abandoned farmstead, seemed to me to symbolize that even though Ellie lost so much during her journey, she never did lose her sense of self and identity, despite losing her ability for creative expression and playing the guitar. I love how the last shot of the game is Ellie walking away from the guitar that Joel is preparing for Ellie in the first shot of the game. Seeing her walk away from it, to me, felt like we were simultaneously seeing the last act that Joel and Ellie were able to do for each other. Joel setting up Ellie's guitar and Ellie having sought vengeance. Yeah, and it's nice, it's a little bit of a cliche at this point to have like the exact same shot for the opening and ending, but it was cool that it focused on the same object, but completely different, different angles and stuff like that. Caleb Bone submits a question on Patreon, said, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts and interpretation of the meaning and placement of the final flashback with Joel and Ellie seconds before credits roll. I think the placement is powerful because it provides clues Ellie's headspace is in and what she plans to do next, but I also think it's important for Ellie's revenge arc, showing the final conversation she had with Joel and that her chance to work towards reconciliation with him was robbed by Abby. I struggled to connect with Ellie in Seattle, but that one conversation helped snap her arc right into place for me. What do y'all think about that final flashback? The discussion on the porch. I had that tough time with it too, because it's like,
I think, another thing that I mentioned earlier is that like, I guess I was still kind of frustrated by the idea that like, like the fundamental premise of like, oh yeah, like you robbed me of this thing. And, my mention earlier was that like, well, they were going to kill you without ever telling, like you would have died not knowing that you were going to be part of our larger cause. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like that's sort of where Joel, like, and I was frustrated in that scene that they never really addressed that, but it does act like like with that aside, it does act as like a coda of like their kind of rocky relationship since between the ending of The Last of Us and the beginning of Part 2, where it feels like, okay, well, because I think the question you have at that point is like, okay, if their relationship was so rough, which is what they introduced early on, then why is she so bent on getting revenge for this person that she kind of hates right now? And then this acts as like this is why.
It's because they were inching towards forgiveness. She says she'd like to try forgiveness overall. And that's the thing is, in watching this in the moment, I was like, what is this telling us that we didn't know before? Just that idea of, hey, remember The Last of Us Part 1's ending? Let's touch on it one more time. It's like, yeah, we got it. But I think you're right there, Surreal. And James Martin writes in and says, I love the game. It was incredible. I am not one to cry at games/movies, basically never, but my only weakness are father-child relationships and stuff when the character finally cracks. The flashback ending with Joel and Ellie got me because it did both so beautifully. In Ellie's diary, she mentioned that all she had was, quote, that last conversation, and we assumed that to be the one where she told him they were done. which is heartbreaking. To find out that their last conversation was actually a happier one was amazing, but also heartbreaking in a different way as their reconciliation was cut short. Complex, nuanced, amazing stuff. I think, James nailed it there. I think that is the point of that final flashback, is to retrofit what their last conversation was in that context there. Anthony Perez says, did you all notice that Joel's voice sounded a bit different all the game? A bit softer. I think that was a nuance by Troy Baker to convey the contentment he's found in Jackson. So much so that he lets his guard down around Abby's group. It's a great performance overall. Yeah, I guess we haven't talked too much about Joel's performance, but it is just kind of that older, more beaten down, but he's always just kind of like in dejected mode around Ellie anyway, so that might explain that kind of more down tone. Marty Colley says, Joel and Ellie's final conversation together is a moment that'll stick with me for a very long time. I was supposed to die in the hospital. My life would have effing mattered, but you took that from me. These are just a bunch of quotes. If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again. I'm sorry I'm not doing impersonations of these characters, but you get the idea. And then Ellie says, I don't think I can ever forgive you for that, but I would like to try. She mattered. I can't believe I'm saying this, but when Ellie finally chose to try to forgive Joel, I was weeping. And I'm not using that word lightly. No work of art has ever gotten a reaction that large and intense out of me. Last of Us Part 2 is now my favorite work of art of all time. No, I have not seen Hamilton, but I'll change that soon. Reference to the Game Informer show. Jason M. O'Brien says, Ellie and Abby looked like I felt when those credits rolled, and I felt that was the goal. It's always fascinating to see the impact hate has on someone, especially seeing that impact ripple through the lives of the people around them. All of it stemming from one man's decision. Joel could have saved Ellie without killing Abby's father. He didn't kill that doctor because he loved Ellie. He killed him because he hated him. A wise philosopher once said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. We see that suffering in Joel from the strained relationship he had with Ellie. We see Ellie suffering because she believes her life doesn't matter, from Joel's death, robbing her of the chance to forgive him, the breakdown of her relationship with Dina, and due to losing 2 fingers, her inability to play guitar. Abby, who lost everyone, her father Jerry, Owen, the only man she ever loved, and every one of her friends. Finally, the player. I'm interested in hearing from you about how the player suffered from Joel's decision. It is this focused through line that makes me believe The Last of Us may be the best written game series ever.
I mean, I guess, like, I don't know that I buy that he killed the doctor because he hated him.
Right.
I think it was more of like he was trying to save Ellie, and it didn't matter who was in his way.
He hated the idea of what the doctor was standing for and arguing for. Yeah. Holden Hintz says, not much is spoiled for me, thankfully, except for one vague comment. Ellie lets Abby live. This eventually became like my version of Hansen's experience with Knives Out. Please check out the MinnMax show from months ago for that experience. I knew the very end, but I was constantly wondering how they would get there and what were the circumstances to trigger it, which was honestly brilliant. To be reminded of the last time you saw someone right before almost executing your revenge for them is a tender and powerful moment. Ending the game on that flashback where Ellie utters, then my life would have meant something to Joel, is extremely powerful and one of the smartest ending sequences I've ever played. Thank you, Holden, for writing in and for your support. Chris Logan says, I played part 1 for the first time just before part 2 was released. I quickly realized why the ending wasn't spoiled, because that would have actually been very hard to do. The ending to The Last of Us can't be summed up in one sentence, and that is kind of that in one sentence that has any kind of impact without context. Imagine telling someone the game ends with a lie and a cutscene. It's really something you need to experience yourself. The end to The Last of Us Part 2 is this times 1,000. While playing the game, I was trying to guess where it was going and kept coming up with Ellie and Abby rejoin the Fireflies, and they finally developed the vaccine. You should all feel very blessed I was not in charge of writing this thing, because that final act was so much more impactful than anything. I could have come up with this, anything I could have come up with. And the game's finale certainly can't be summed up in one sentence. You just have to experience it for yourself. Yeah, nice way to put it. You know, a lot of people complain about spoilers, which is fair. There's so many flying around at this point, but it's just such a rat's nest, a rat king's nest of plot circling around Joel at this point that it is a tough thing to spoil emotionally what's going on here.
Yeah, because I mean, even you mentioned that you saw a shot of the farmhouse, but how much do you feel like that spoiled the game for you? A
little bit, but yes, I mean not to a drastic extent here. Jose Gabriel has a killer comment saying, we could have avoided all this drama if that dang soldier didn't shoot Sarah. I guess if you want to wind back the clock, if that wouldn't have happened.
Maybe, yeah.
There you go.
I mean,
That's when I knew it was starting. That's why I was so frustrated this entire series.
Okay, this makes a lot of sense.
do you think Joel would have died if Sarah would have stayed alive? Do you think like him trying to protect her would have gotten himself killed?
It probably would have made his relationship with Tommy better. So then he might have stayed at. He might have been with Tommy longer. Yeah.
Okay, then maybe he'd be safe. Hey, something we haven't talked about much in this section is it's a game that you play. So some people had thoughts about playing this section here. Willie Aguilar says, I forgot to mention as well that someone mentioned you could turn on a pinging with your listen mode. I did that after someone brought it up and I never went back. It made it so much better and easier for finding items and a good way to check if I'd gotten everything in a room before I left. Good call, Willie. The champ writes in and says, did anyone else get tired of the gameplay loop? I love this game, but I wish it was about like 2 hours shorter. However, I don't know what sections I would cut down or trim. Did you guys get sick of the gameplay loop, basic gameplay going on here throughout the experience?
I mean, that's more or less how I felt throughout like a lot of this, like outside of the sniper section, which I really liked. Yeah. And like towards the end, like that last house I really liked. But like for the most part, yeah, I felt like I was basically like, I wasn't really shooting or even stealthing. I was just basically trying to see how much I could run through these encounters. Turns out you can actually do, you kind of can in some cases. Sometimes you can't, but this was definitely like I didn't hate it, but it did feel like, okay, I'm getting through this to get to the next cutscene. It'd
be really fun to watch speed runs of Last of Us Part 2. God, I should look into that because I bet that's a whole world.
I mean, I saw a speed run of Left Behind, and it was like it was pretty short because like they find like a way you can clip from the beginning of the game, basically, because you end up in the same area. So they basically find a way to trigger the cutscene that happens right at the end. So they basically like hop on this one ledge and then come back down the
that's fun
area and then just do the last section.
Yeah.
I imagine it would go something like that, but
more clipping.
I guess you couldn't really do that since you don't loop very well. But I'm sure it's a series of those.
You would clip and become like this Rat King-esque hybrid of Ellie and Abby. Like,
or like totally like the idea that like maybe they just happened like in their kind of like the modeling or whatever, the farmhouse just happens to be modeled right next to Jackson. So it's like, you can just run to the end of the farmhouse.
That'd be awesome.
The one part of the gameplay that did get tired for me though was just constantly scouring for collectibles that I ultimately feel like they shouldn't have even put in the game because...
Did you really look for those that much?
Well, it was the collectibles, but then also, I mean, you have like the training manuals that unlock entire skill trees and you have guns and stuff. So I felt like my own obsession with looking for stuff wasn't completely my fault because they kind of put in this feeling of like, I have to look for stuff because otherwise I may miss important things. And that was the part that kind of dragged on. I kind of do want to play it again now that I could just like focus on just the gameplay and be relieved, because there were even parts of the game where it's like, okay, it's a chase scene now. This is great because I don't have to stop and look around for, resources and stuff like that.
Yep. Aiden says, I started New Game Plus and it's very enjoyable to get to Seattle for the first time with Ellie already having the silenced SMG. I'm mildly disappointed that the points you accumulate can only be used for concept artwork and models and aren't there for costumes, render modes, or game modifiers to be unlocked as there are in other Naughty Dog games, but that's a small gripe for a game that I enjoyed so much. This is insane, but it was during this gameplay section that I realized that there's a quick turn. Like, holding X and back. I had not used it the entire game, and it might have saved my life a couple times.
They did in the first Last of Us. They had a section when they were trying to get through the checkpoint, and then there's a big explosion. They were like, "Close the checkpoint," and then they closed it. At that point, it says, "Use quick turn to turn around." Oh,
really? Okay. So
that was the only time that I used quick turn in that, and I noticed like, wow, they haven't brought up the quick turn yet.
After talking about this game for, I don't know, 10 hours or so, it's crazy that we haven't talked about the system that it seems like they want us to care about more than at least I did, like that momentum strike system with Abby. Did anybody understand what that was or use it?
I unlocked it. So it's like basically like, if you remember, I think the closest parallel is like Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, where it's like, oh, if you get like once you get like a kill, basically, you can kind of start stringing those together. But it's kind of like a weakened version of that because I don't think it automatically kills everybody.
Huh.
But it is kind of like, here's a super strong melee attack that you can use if you keep using it on different people, and you can upgrade it to make that stronger.
Oh,
Sure.
okay. Gotcha.
But I never used it because I was like,
didn't.
I realized as well, I never used a mine as Abby throughout as Ellie throughout the entire game.
Oh.
Which really
I tried to use it against the boss as Ellie, the guy you find in the arcade.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I thought you could just throw them and they would just automatically detonate. It just seemed to like bounce off them. And from then on, I just completely wrote off mines as like being in any way useful. So yeah, I probably should have used those more often, but I definitely got a lot more sparing with Molotovs. It's just like, yeah, there's 3 guys. I'm just going to throw 3 Molotovs. I'm done. Like, I want them all dead immediately.
You get the idea.
Yeah. And at one point, I also ended up getting stuck. Like there was this weird in the farmhouse area as Abby. There's a part where you can there's this tall grass next to like, I don't know, like a wooden platform with kind of like a hole in it. And I ended up crouching underneath, like glitching underneath that platform. And I was just stuck there.
Oh, really?
But and I was stuck there for a really long time just trying to figure out like, I don't want to start this checkpoint over, even though it's like, couldn't have been more than like a minute away. But at one point, like a Seraphite like came up and the prompt to grab them came up, so I stealthed them through the floor, and I was able to get out of there and stealth them.
Psych.
So that was me activating Abby's magic power.
Perfect. Do you all have that moment every time you switch to like a stun grenade? I think has it. Anything with a fuse. Whenever I switch to it in the inventory, and you just hear that. Tss, I would get so freaked out. Like, I know it's not going to go off in my hand, but like I could not hold those because it just made me panic that it was going to explode around me at any second.
Like, put it away.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I did the same thing with like a Molotov. I'm like, wait, why would I use this? I'm not going to just hand this or have this in my hand the entire time.
Right, it's terrifying.
No, I got to switch over to like a gun or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sebastian Jensen says, my final thoughts on the whole game, masterpiece. A lot of people using the word masterpiece. Adam Zimmer says, I remember Hansen wondering if some of the incredible praise from Dan Trachtenberg on Twitter was hyperbolic, but after finishing the game, I honestly agree with them. If you recall, Dan Trachtenberg, director of 10 Cloverfield Lane, he said, I played The Last of Us 2. It's a master's piece, referring, of course, to Neil Druckmann, but also every department head, artist, craftsman, QA, etc. Masters working at the highest level one can work. The acting is some of the best I've seen across any medium. And on and on and on. Very high praise. I'm wowed by a lot of aspects of this game, but I don't think I'm in that. God, I would maybe. I'm really on the fence about like. No, I respect that the game does so much, and it got me so good. I think I consider it a gaming masterpiece, just for the vision that they're going for here. Jeffem, masterpiece? Yay, nay?
Yeah, I mean it's still, like I said, having like 5 endings to the game still feels a little weird, but I didn't dislike any of them, and I actually ended up enjoying each kind of piece. It gave me a lot to process afterwards, and I guess I'm still thinking about it to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean, I have reservations about like mostly like a lot about the gameplay and some of like the larger things of why it didn't hit for me. But I kind of agree with like his individual points of like, I think this game is like incredibly well acted. I think like it's like it never feels like, oh, this is like good for a video game. Like the performances that people give, I think are like immaculate. And I think it kind of speaks to what I think Naughty Dog does best, which is just like characters that leave this powerful impression on you. So like whatever reservations I have about kind of like the world and stuff behind them, I think like the character arcs and the writing of how these individual characters process this stuff, I think is like doesn't need to be like for a video game qualifier.
Right.
Yeah.
Betos Burrito says the storytelling reminded me a lot of Pulp Fiction of all things. Characters popping back into the story even after their deaths? Check. Non-linear narrative from multiple perspectives? Check. Blurred lines between heroes and villains? Redemption arcs? Awkward dance scenes? Check. Obviously, you could do the exercise with lots of non-traditional stories. For me, both works benefit greatly from the willingness to experiment with narrative and create unique experiences tastier than a Royale with cheese. I did not think of that. Going through it. Antonio Laberdy says, I finished this game early due to my lack of time to play games, so I've been reflecting on this for a while. This was a good, maybe great story/game that just wasn't made for me, and that is okay. Last of Us Part 1 was and is my favorite game of all time. Joel is one of my favorite characters. I never understood the impression that he was a, quote, good guy by traditional standards. He was a smuggler for 20 years in the post-apocalyptic world. So after Abby killed him, no amount of character defamation of Joel or character inflation of Abby could change my position that I wanted her dead, and I wanted to be the one to do it. Perhaps this game would have been a home run for me had it not been an established IP with that Joel connection. Yeah, maybe a lot of it does come down to how much people love Joel. Like I was trying to think, of a character I really care about in a game, like a Liara from Mass Effect. Like if that was Liara that was beaten over the head with a golf club, is there anything I could do? But I think I would still.
Liara is not a bad person. Like I really love Joel too, but I recognize the things that he did that led to his own death, and I recognize that he was, not a good person and probably did have it coming, and so.
Yeah, I don't know. Liara kind of got dark with that Shadow Broker stuff. She was kind of leaning into it a little bit, so no one's a saint here. Peacock says, I absolutely love the narrative structure of this game. Splitting the story into 4 parts. Present Ellie, past Ellie, present Abby, past Abby, to get you to empathize with both characters is such a bold move, and having finally rolled the credits, I feel like it paid off in a huge way. My question is, do any of you think this storytelling structure will be recycled in more games in the future, or maybe movies or another medium?
I feel like it does. Like, a previous email basically just kind of compared it to Pulp Fiction, right? So I don't think it's right. I don't think it's like the structure of it, I don't think is like super groundbreaking, even if, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's really well done. Yeah. But I think it's a very difficult thing to replicate, especially in games, because like, I don't know if you know this, but this game costs a lot of money to make. So it's like, it's hard to like, even if you did, it would be something that's more like low budget. Like, it's like maybe a text adventure game that does something like this, right? But it's not going to be, it's very hard to replicate it at this scale.
Yeah, it's kind of like we got the same kind of question about Final Fantasy VII Remake of like, are all old JRPGs going to get this treatment now? And it's like, well, no, not unless a whole lot more people have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on these kind of things.
Right. But if Sony wanted to give the treatment to Legend of Dragoon, I mean, they show that they can give a budget to Naughty Dog. Why not the Dragoon team? Ooh, there you go. Naughty Dog's Legend of Dragoon. Think about that.
There you go.
Yeah. Andrew Holmes says, I feel like the last half of the game would have been more impactful if we had started the game as Abby, possibly without even seeing Joel die until we got to the beginning of Ellie's half. I think it would have made Ellie's revenge mission more impactful, as we would have been more familiar with each target. It may also allow people to like Abby right off the bat before we see the terrible things she's done. Plus, the shock of seeing Tommy as the intruder would have been shocking and would leave the player asking questions. I think there's a lot of fun remixing you can do with the structure of this game, and the good news is that's for YouTube to do. Let fans re-edit this. They're going to have the chronological cut. They're going to have all these different cuts, and so I think we might see some interesting remixes, like 2-hour cuts of this that are just a completely different order that I think would also work pretty well.
That brings up one of the points that I wanted to bring up was there has been a lot of criticism of like, they're like Naughty Dog is trying to manipulate us into liking Abby, and it's like they're beating us over the head with this. If you had played that section, if you had played through Abby's character first, or if Abby's story had just been like a completely separate IP, I don't think anyone would be making those claims of like, they're making this character a martyr or anything like that. I feel like she is just a well-realized character who's mostly good, but still certainly does some bad things and just comes off as a very realistic character. It's just that framing of us has made us much more critical of like Naughty Dog's intentions with that character.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
I do think I could definitely see people being even more off put by like if we were introduced to Abby and hear all these unfamiliar characters, people like, what is this? Like I wanted to, like the entire marketing was, Joel and Ellie. Why are we playing this character I've never seen before? Yeah. So I think the people who are already mad at this game even matter.
Yeah. They'd be super pissed if you trick them into liking this character that then killed your favorite character at the end, I think that would be
pissed, but I think it'd also be interesting.
Betrayal.
It'd be an interesting psychological trick from Naughty Dog. I think both ways are interesting. But James Rodriguez says, now that it's all said and done, what were your expectations for this game going in, and how does it compare to what the game actually was?
I feel like people talked up like the brutality and how like the game was pretty violent, and I don't know, like I guess I never felt like a moment where I was like, oh, this is like intensely brutal, or like there are moments that feel like they're messed up, but it's like it definitely felt like there was going to be something that was like, I don't know, like next levels, not to maybe romanticize it too much, but like something that is like, oh, this is absurd, like something
Crazy
on the level
Scar?
of like waterboarding.
Okay, yeah, but like Crazy Scar cheek guy, that didn't do it for you?
Well, like I guess it is like, I don't know. I guess in video game violence, it's hard for me to like recoil that stuff. But I thought it was going to be like beyond kind of like the physical and more like some people get up to some like psychological stuff, I guess is maybe where I was kind of expecting it.
Like pulling off Ellie's fingernails or something like that?
Yeah, maybe like something where it kind of lingers on that section, or just where it is less about like, oh, this happened versus like, oh man, they really linger on that shot and they kind of want to do it. There are a couple moments, but it didn't feel as intense as people were maybe making it out to be. But I think beyond that, I think it like more or less met my expectations of like the tone of the story, and like obviously I had very different ideas about where the story was going to go, but it didn't feel like, oh, here's a crazy left turn twist that completely upends everything, outside of like Abby, which they set up pretty early of like, oh, I'm sure there's more to this character than they're going to show us now.
Right. Yeah, I think the hyperbole obviously was so over the moon. I was curious where it was going to go, and when people start talking about like what a bold game it is, I was expecting even more bodies to hit the floor. But, you know, that's just because I think that would be more bold. Maybe it's just the lazy way out. And structurally, I think is obviously the bold thing here, but it's just tough not to let your mind run when everyone's talking about how crazy this game is structured. Which it is, but it's just the danger of hearing those expectations. I think I was expecting it to be more intense and kind of scary overall. Like, I'm a complete coward when it comes to games, and I wasn't ever really like scared to play the game. And that's kind of a shock to me.
Well, yeah, except for those damn stalkers. There were a couple sections with stalkers where I just wanted to get the hell out of it. I think for me, my going into it, I was skeptical, and I just was hoping that they would tell a story that kind of made it worth making a sequel in the first place.
Right.
And I guess what was surprising to me was I walked away with a new character that I ended up liking more than Ellie or Joel from the original one. And I think, and Lev is also kind of in that boat for me, where it's like, these are really interesting characters. I really appreciated the time that I got to spend with them. I ended up caring about them so much more, to the point where, you know, towards the end, I felt completely ambivalent about, you know, Ellie's motivations and what she was doing. And that to me is just, you know, really surprising and really good storytelling, that you can kind of twist those characters around and introduce new characters that I care even more about.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I guess for me, when me entering the thing, again, I'm coming in with like all these super high expectations on my own part, but like I tried to temper those, and I was with you, Ben, where I was like, oh, I'm thinking that this game's going to be way more like intense in terms of like not even like subject matter, or not even like scares, but like just how tense I would be throughout the entire thing. Right. Where it's just like this just a full throttle thing. And I thought that I was going to get into this is just full throttle at this point after Joel's death. But like, there were a lot of moments of like levity, or like, oh yeah, this is not as intense and stuff. There are definitely parts where it's super intense. Rat King still was a really intense part for me. But yeah, there were not as many things where I was like, oh, I'm not taking a break. Again, I'm using double negative, where I am not taking a break where I'm like, oh, I'm just keep on going, pedal to metal kind of thing.
Right. Connor writes in and says, love the game, loved it. I want to talk more about the LGBTQ representation in this game and the overall response to it. From my own perspective as an LGBTQ gamer, many people in the community often criticize these kinds of storylines for being too depressing. Everyone in the game world has a rough life, and to me, it would feel like a cop-out to have Ellie live the rest of her days in peace. I think the big difference here is that Ellie's problems don't exist because she's gay. She just happens to be gay in a world where no one really gets that perfect happy ending. Lev's life is hard because he's trans, but the game makes it very clear that the behavior causing these problems is not acceptable. The player is supposed to feel horrified at the way he's treated. Spending 12 hours in the shoes of Abby, who accepts Lev's gender identity without hesitation, is a brilliant way to communicate this message to a wider gaming audience. And Lev gets the closest thing to a happy ending this game can have. He's living with Abby, who loves him, and the Fireflies, who can keep him safe. I want to applaud Naughty Dog for including all this in a huge AAA game that will be played by millions of people. It meant so much to me. It's a nice perspective to have. Thank you, Connor. Trace says, the one storyline thread that was left surprisingly unresolved to me was that of Ellie's immunity. It seemed like it was going to be such a big part of the game, with the opening scene of Joel telling Tommy about it, Joel making Ellie put on her mask when they're going to get guitar strings, and Ellie having several conversations with Dina to convince her that she is in fact immune. After that, it just kind of disappears. I feel like this omission has to be a nod to the possible plans for The Last of Us Part 3, because I can't imagine Naughty Dog just leaving that story thread unresolved forever.
Yeah, I think that is, again, like that story function for them. I think they're only interested in it in like the idea of the immunity as far as it serves the plot. And in The Last of Us, it served like the main plot of like the only reason we're having this journey together is because you're immune.
Yeah.
Whereas it because it like she has another motive of killing Abby or whatever. They don't need that to drive the plot. So it's just like, okay, in the scenarios where it's relevant, we're going to bring it up. But otherwise, it's going to be the parts of the flashback where it is the reason that Ellie and Joel's relationship deteriorated. But it's not the driving force here because they hit several times. It's like people have kind of given up on a cure, and that is also weighing on Ellie to some extent. But the idea is like, yeah, people aren't necessarily, ready. Like her immunity isn't even something that people can take advantage of at this point. Yeah, and I feel like them not doing anything with that is baked into Joel's, like fundamental decision that he made on her behalf, which is that like we are throwing away this opportunity in order to keep this person alive. Yeah. There's no like future like, oh, well now Ellie does save the world because she's immune and they learn to use that. It's like Ellie gets to continue living, and that's all that immunity is worth at this point.
But to get to their point, I mean, don't you think that if they make a Last of Us Part 3 that they will touch on that? Don't you think that's going to be the idea as the Fireflies?
Yeah, I sure hope that they don't make a Part 3.
You really don't want them to?
They've left me back at that position at this point.
Yeah, I think if they do make a Part 3, then Ellie doesn't necessarily have a whole lot at this point. She has less than she came in with, so maybe it is like the quest for the cure or whatever is the driving force.
But that would feel like such a betrayal of all the storytelling and all the decisions that these characters have made throughout it at this point.
It wouldn't feel thematically appropriate to like what their strengths are as a group. Was like we want to tell stories about interesting characters. And so like Ellie just like, oh, I want to have purpose in my life is maybe all right, but I feel like they kind of covered that in the first game.
Yeah. Maybe it'll be like something more specific if it's going to be too broad, so she can only save one person that gets infected. I know it's a stupid storytelling cop-out, but I don't know.
You have to eat my brain now, Lev.
Just eat it, Lev.
It's the only way.
Could you imagine if they were if their Left Behind was just like, oh yeah, in this 2-hour gameplay thing, Ellie's just going to cure the entire world. Yeah, which is like, here's as a quick aside, here's the arc of Ellie curing humanity.
And it just like zooms out to space and shows like the world get greener. People all over the world join hands.
Commercial at the end of Mad Men.
Yep, exactly. RJ writes in and says, quote, I was a horror amongst horrors must I dwell, which is a quote from Tales of the Black Freighter within Watchmen. Deep cut. Maybe not so deep. Anyways, that is how I felt after completing The Last of Us Part 2. Even if Ellie did not finish her revenge fantasy, she did amass quite the body count getting to Abby. I wish they had stats. Yeah, I also wish they had stats. Also, it might have been disappointing for Ellie to kill Abby in such a fragile state. Overall, an excellent gaming experience, which I will never play again because, in my opinion, it was not a fun game. I have 2 questions. Last of Us Part 3. Who do you want the story to focus on first, Abby or Ellie? If you had to choose. I mean, I'm in Abby camp by far.
Yeah.
New character.
Oh, you rascal. Serial?
I know, right?
I think, part of me would want for them to explore a little bit about the implications of the world. So new character in a new location, even like what's going on in different countries. Because that's the thing you never see in zombie fiction is like, how is this affecting people on a worldwide scale?
Right.
And at that point, it would have so little to do with what The Last of Us is about that maybe it's not a good idea.
Yeah. And then RJ wants to know if this is our favorite PS4 exclusive so far. I think it's still. I was thinking about it towards the end. Like, do I like this more than God of War? And I think I still like God of War a lot more. It's like that setting so much more than this setting, despite as many amazing moments as there are in Last of Us. I just feel like God of War is a tighter experience here.
Mm-hmm.
This is such a dumb me answer, but I think my favorite PS4 exclusive is technically PT, but then God of War.
You snob.
I love PT so much. It is so good. But it's not even exclusive to PS4 at this point.
That is true.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, let's see, maybe when Hyperdot is ported to PS4 and then it's deleted on all their systems, Charles, then it'll become the best PS4.
Yeah, then I'll have to be like, ooh, that'll probably do. No, I think because, okay, the things that I'm bouncing between would be Uncharted 4, God of War, and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I might
and the
go
answer is Spider-Man, says Charles. Definitive.
Yes.
Hold him to
Definitive.
it.
I'm gonna say Spider-Man.
Jeff, where are you at?
I maybe, but I would have to look through all of the other PS4 exclusives that I'm not remembering right now.
You're not gonna get out by saying maybe.
I mean, probably yes.
Probably yes. There we go. Great.
Compared to the PS4 exclusives I can remember right now, then yes,
there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see. Okay, he said it. I'm trying to think of any deep cut PS4 exclusive, but my brain is melting down.
You guys are JRPG fans. I guess technically Persona 4 is exclusive, but I don't think this is the crowd for that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Persona 4 was what you call it?
PS4 exclusive?
For a year. I mean, that won't be relevant for too long. PS5 or Persona 5, you meant, by the way, Cyril? Hello? Oh no. What I was trying to say, Cyril, was, do you mean Persona 5?
Yeah. That's
okay.
Well, I don't know the exact note that we left off on. I do remember saying, Persona 5 technically counts as a PS4.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But this isn't the crowd for that.
Yeah. Anyways, that was confusing. Yeah, our internet cut out, so there was a huge jump there. So please ignore the abrupt shift in tone. All right, here we go.
We've jumped forward to day 3 now.
That's
we
right.
go.
And
podcast
now,
day 3
and
definitely
now,
is what this podcast feels like.
And now Jeffum is hosting.
Okay,
that's right. And that's it. Thanks, guys.
No, hang on. We have more comments left on Patreon.
Oh, okay.
Mattress Monkey submitted a comment. Says, I want the final menu screen with the boat on the Catalina shore to be a PS4 dynamic theme. Seeing that boat and knowing the journey it represents not only for Abby and Lev, but for Ellie too, makes it something I want to look back at and remember for a long time. Yeah. Do they not have a dynamic theme for Last of Us Part 2? I'm sure they do, but I guess that boat's kind of a spoiler one, so maybe they'd wait a little bit before they'd pop that one out.
They do have a dynamic theme that you can get if you buy the deluxe edition.
Oh, which, there we go.
Somebody might have bought. So.
I was not aware that there's any theme for PS4 outside of Firewatches. Right when that game came out, I got that theme, and I have not changed it since because it's so awesome. Jose Gabriel says, I would like to point out how good the character's breathing sounds in this game. The acceleration and deceleration sounds realistic when encounters get intense and when things calm down. Great note.
Yes, actually, there was a thing that I saw on. I was a little. I'm not spoiled. It was after I played the game, but I did see something online on Twitter about a thread of the. Where there was like a tweet about the breathing that the characters do. So that like there's an open mouth state and a closed mouth state where like when there are no enemies around, like Elliot or Abby will breathe through their mouth and be like, like they're out of breath and stuff. But the second that there's an enemy in view or somewhere, they'll then and then start breathing through their nose.
It's like that duality of in Spider-Man where they recorded all the lines twice for when he's swinging and saying it versus standing still and saying it. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Robert Gardner says, one detail that really stood out to me is when Abby would grab her shoulder and do a wind-up motion. I have to do this exact motion a few times a day to pop my shoulder for relief. Does anyone else have this / notice that? No, I think this is something muscular people do, so we're not really familiar with that concept.
Yeah. But I did notice the animation. Yeah. So
I wish Abby would have done the Mission Impossible Fallout animation of reloading her arms like Henry Cavill.
Suddenly she has like very different hair, and people are making conspiracy theories about how that shot was shot.
That's right. They got rid of her mustache. Sean GZ Do It Easy is back again. He says, did anyone try to shoot the balls on the pool table? I didn't even notice the pool table.
No.
I shot them with the handgun, and indeed, they will move. However, not as fast as I would think. The physics make them seem like they're the heaviest balls in the world. I would think a bullet would make it fly off the table, but instead they move about 6 to 8 inches. Maybe there's an overgrown fungi on the table making the ball harder to move. I don't know, but I really appreciate Naughty Dog's effort for giving them physics to begin with. That is true.
It's like the one fantasy aspect of that world is everything is the same as planet Earth, except billiard balls weigh 800 pounds.
That's right. Joshua Will Janine says, where's the multiplayer? I need it. It's so crazy that we haven't really thought about the fact that multiplayer was cut from this game a while ago, and their wording from Naughty Dog was, as development began on the evolution of our factions mode from The Last of Us Part 1, the vision of the team grew beyond an additional mode that could be included with our enormous single-player campaign. Wanting to support both visions, we made the difficult choice that The Last of Us Part 2 would not include an online mode. So the assumption then is PlayStation 5, Last of Us multiplayer thing. But then I'm still wondering, would they then bundle that with a specifically made for PS5 version of The Last of Us Part 2 campaign, which seems likely?
Maybe they just do it in the remaster.
Maybe.
Big on that point.
Yeah, but I'm curious to see what they do with that. I think it could be really fun if they are blowing it out in a big way. Just to have Naughty Dog release like a multiplayer-focused game, multiplayer first.
Yeah.
I mean, It's been a while since I've done that. Jesse James writes in with my favorite comment, maybe of the entire deepest dive for The Last of Us Part 2 here. Jesse James writes in and says, did you all notice how many names in The Last of Us have double letters? You've got Ellie, Abby, Jesse, Tommy, Manny, Danny, Isaac, Abby's father Jerry, Ellie's horse Shimmer, Joel Miller, Owen Moore, Nora Harris, and lastly JJ. The first game also included Tess, Bill, Ellie's mother Anna, and a slew of names only mentioned once. As experts of the double letter, what are your thoughts? Is this totally normal or a bit odd?
Wow, I never noticed that.
It's very striking now.
Wow.
Huh. I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason for it, but that's a very interesting thing to notice.
Well, hang on. Now I'm up in my head because the most confusing thing about the staff that made this game is Neil Druckmann. There's 2 N's in Druckmann. Do you think he just really wants to remind people, hey, he's our 2N brother?
He must.
Druckmann 2 N's.
But my name has 2 F's, so I'm okay with it.
Okay, it works out for everybody. I liked in the credits too, I think Kyle mentioned it on the MinnMax Show podcast, but I like that they have a special screen thanking Bruce Straley, the director of the first game. Obviously is a huge influence on Uncharted and a lot of games going back through Naughty Dog's history. So they just said a note thanking him for all of Naughty Dog's successes in general, which I thought was a very sweet note in the credits there that got me. Hey everybody, you know what that sound is?
Success.
It's the sound of every supporter on Patreon going, yeah, we're good. That was The Last of Us Part 2 there. Thank you, everybody that supports our Patreon in any way to keep this whole indie trainer rolling, to let the Game Club format continue into the future, and for submitting so many amazing comments and thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2, and for everybody taking their time and savoring this game and playing through it with us. That is mind-boggling that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have been pacing themselves to keep up with us. I mean, insane.
Yeah,
So,
there were some hard places to stop in this one.
Yep.
yes, absolutely. But hey, for everybody that commented, thank you. Thank you. Big round of applause here. Yeah. Killing it. Thank you, everybody, for helping us accomplish our mission of creating the best, most thorough discussion about The Last of Us Part 2 on the internet. If you enjoyed this discussion, if you enjoyed this format, please help share it. If you know a fan of Naughty Dog's games, or somebody tweets out a link to some spoiler cast for The Last of Us Part 2, be like, hey, I got a spoiler cast for you, buddy. Kablooey! And then you send them the link to the deepest dive, and maybe they'll be into it.
Definitely just reply with kablooey and the URL.
Right.
I really hope you do that.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, Serial, Jeff, and you guys are great. Charles, thank you for joining us on this journey. Holy cow, man. Great job.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Do you think you enjoyed playing through a game more doing it in this format, or was it stressful to keep up and be pressured to have smart things to say?
It wasn't pressured to have smart things to say. Again, there were a couple of parts where I was like, oh, I want to keep going. I'm not going to keep going. Right. But no, it's been awesome, especially like hearing everybody from the community's feedback and stuff, to hear all the different perspectives and thoughts on it has been really good for like me digesting all this stuff. Right. Oh, that's great. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can unlock the podcast version. But if you're watching this on YouTube as well, there's an ongoing discussion in the Discord as well. There's a whole channel devoted to the deepest dive. So this is just a fraction of the discussion. All the comments left on the Patreon are a fraction of the discussion. And we will be back in the future with another deepest dive. I have in my head what I want it to be in the month of August.
Little Women.
Don't even joke about that. I would love to do Little Women, but the community, by the way, wants us to do Little Women. And I love Greta Gerwig's Little Women. But the problem is, if you say deepest dive on Little Women, we have to make it the best, most thorough discussion about the Little Women on the internet, which is it's an impossible task. And there's like books and animes and 14 films. Yeah. Like you just can't do it reasonably.
You can't just dip your toes in with one little remake.
That's right.
You gotta go full Little Women.
Also, four guys, definitely the panel you'd want on that discussion.
That's right. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, maybe we could shake it up. We'd figure something out. But no, I have a game in my mind. We'll see if we end up landing with that one. But I think it would fit in the month of August pretty well. Thank you so much. Please tell a friend if you like the format. And as always, Suriel?
Be good, have fun, let's go.
All right, bye, everybody! Sorry, I just never really know how to sign up. That was like, that's a big boy.
Oh, I could have said that's a big boy.
I was thinking you were going to do that's a big boy, but that's totally fine. Do you want to get your name or Twitch or YouTube channel in the description of everything we release? Record a podcast with us, put a picture of your choice on MinnMax's TV, or a whole lot more? You can check out the benefits for supporting us on Patreon. If you support MinnMax at any tier on Patreon, you can submit questions or comments for us to read on the air, and you'll also get access to the wonderful MinnMax Discord. We need your help to keep this whole indie trainer rolling, so we'd appreciate it if you checked us out.